Today on the show, it's lights, camera, and a weird, shiny black spider creature with people hands. Villeneuve's Dune is here, and we're going to talk about it.
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name's Abu.
My name's Leo.
Today's the day. It's time.
The day! We got there. Hey, might have taken a year longer than we expected, but
exactly.
We got there.
Oh my gosh, the moment we've building up to for a year and a half.
Oh my gosh.
Wild stuff. Yeah, it's crazy to finally be here, but it's here.
Yeah.
The movie's out.
We've
all seen it, and it's finally time to talk about it in depth as we do here on Gom Jabbar.
Well, and as you're sort of implying, this episode is going to be for once you've seen the movie.
Yeah.
Watch the movie. Go, watch it.
That's super important, yeah.
And in fact, today's episode will contain spoilers for the rest of the book Dune. So be warned, if you've only watched the movie and you don't know what happens in the rest of Dune, listen, we've got a book club. We have a whole book club, 10 parts, dedicated to helping you get through the book Dune by Frank Herbert. And I recommend get through the book.
Yes.
And then come back. This episode will be there. It'll be here. It'll be wherever you are hearing it now.
That's right. We promise we're not going anywhere.
Right.
Another bit of housekeeping here.
Yeah.
Email us. Reach out to us at gomjbarpodcast@gmail.com. You know that email. You've heard it in every single episode.
Yeah.
But we want to hear from you. Tell us what you thought of the movie. And of course, you can always use that email to just say hello, tell us what you thought of a recent episode, or share episode topics that you'd like us to cover in the future.
Indeed. You can also support us by becoming a patron on patreon.com/gomjabbar, where you'll get access to bonus episodes and future book clubs. So you finish Dune and you go, if only there were 5 more books written by the same author. Well,
boy, do we have news.
Boy, do I've got some breaking news for you. And the Messiah Book Club actually will be starting in November, which is so exciting. I can't wait.
Yeah, we decided, hey, what if we didn't give ourselves a break and just kept working twice as hard after the movie comes out? And so here we are. Dune Messiah Book Club starts in November.
What if we sprinted for a whole marathon?
We're tired.
There's no way that could go wrong.
Also, speaking of patrons, shouts to Case Aiken, who is our first Kwisatz Haderach level patron.
Oh my gosh.
His generosity, and of course the generosity of all of our supporters and listeners, is the reason we do this and is the reason we get to do this week after week and geek out about Dune with all of you. So thank you, Case, and thank you to everyone who listens, shares, and becomes a patron.
Indeed. We also have some Dune-specific merchandise, some Dune swag on our merch store. Check out gomjabarshop.com. It's another great way to support the podcast. And once you're obsessed with Dune, might be a cool way to signal non-verbally to other people, hey, you like Dune? Yeah, me too.
Yeah. It's a way to signal it right before you then do signal it verbally. You know, it's like
right.
you send out your Dune pheromones and make sure that you're about to connect with the right person.
It makes it so much more tantalizing, that initial connection, if you first had the pheromonal exchange. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The sensuality gets turned up to 11.
Well, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about what we're doing today. We're going to be talking through the movie in 3 sections, starting on Caladan. Then we'll jump to the events on Arrakis, specifically in the city of Arrakeen. And then finally, we'll wrap up talking about Paul and Jessica's escape into the desert, leading up to, of course, the final moments in the movie.
That's right. Those are basically the three major acts of the film as well. So we're going to take
Right.
it one act at a time and break down in each of those sections the scenes, talk about the things that we loved, talk about the things that we disliked or we thought didn't work. And of course, we will discuss the changes that were made from the film because,
Right.
as with every adaptation, there will inevitably be changes, both good and bad. And of course, because this is Gom Jabbar, all throughout the discussion today, we will be sprinkling in some fun, extended lore tidbits because we love that juicy, juicy world building.
It's the best. That's what keeps us here.
Alrighty, we've set it up enough. We've waited 1.5 years. No more delays. Let's talk about the movie.
So the movie begins with this message. Dreams are messages from the deep. And with that thought in mind, we get our first visuals from the movie.
Yeah, and we open up on Arrakis with a voiceover from Chani herself.
Hey, Johnny, love her. Now, she explains to us some of these dynamics going on, the wealth dynamics, right? Quote, by controlling spice production, they, meaning the Harkonnens, became obscenely rich, richer than the emperor himself, end quote. And we've talked about this off mic, but debatable. Could be
Right.
discussing liquid wealth because Baron Harkonnen's like squirreling away a ton of money. But whatever. Maybe Shaddam the Fourth, all of his money is in options these days, and he doesn't actually have a lot in the bank account.
Right. You never want to be too liquid when you're the emperor of the known galaxy. So
It's his economist just like 101, bro. You gotta reinvest.
yeah, that's a small quibble and maybe a detail that only the two of us would notice and split hairs about. But in the end, who cares? The point is the spice has made the Harkonnens very wealthy. There are some really visually stunning shots in this opening sequence.
Yeah.
I loved the shot of the desert as Chani is saying, my planet Arrakis is so beautiful. And we see spice sort of glowing and flowing against the camera lens and flowing over the sands. Some really, really beautiful stuff. Classic Denis Villeneuve, if you know anything about his filmography.
Right.
Now, one last thing I wanted to point out in this opening sequence is something we're going to repeat often throughout this discussion. The scale on display in this movie is incredible.
Yeah.
Near the end of the sequence, we know the Harkonnens have been ordered to leave Arrakis, and we see just rows and rows and rows of soldiers getting onto these massive ships that just engulf all of these soldiers, and then those ships taking off. It's almost hard to wrap your mind around the scale that you're just seeing on the screen.
Yeah, it's wild. Now, the next shot we get is the first sort of like moment in the movie. We are with young Paul Atreides. Ever heard of him? Timothy Chalamet.
Our boy.
Looking great. Is shirtless, but fixes that for the breakfast scene. This is a movie-only scene, right? Created for the movie. Doesn't exist in the book. But it establishes Paul and his mother and also the voice.
Yeah.
But before we get to the voice, Paul awakens. We see some visions of Chani. He's been seeing her in his dreams for years and years. And he's greeted as he wakes up by my favorite glow globes, baby.
Here we go. Glow globes.
They're the best, filled with Icasian microorganisms that are, they're working so hard, so far from home. Bioluminescent, ooey gooey boys. Love them. Glow globes are the best.
They look great in this movie. Love the design. Now, after Paul wakes up, we get some panning sort of cinematic shots of Kaladin, and the viewer is given context for where we are and when we are. The year is 10,191, according to the text on screen, and we are on the Atreides homeworld of Kaladin.
Now, it does seem that they are dropping, in this scenario, the before guild, after guild denotation. And I do wonder, like the average viewer, do they know that this is 30,000 years in the future? Because I assume most people, most average, like the average viewer is going to be like, oh, this is 8,000 years from now. And
yeah.
That's fine. It doesn't make a huge difference, but I don't know. I don't anticipate they're ever going to address this, but yeah, just a fun little, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It's fine. It compresses the timeline, but also it's fine. Like
Right,
it's
right.
doesn't matter. This movie takes place far in the future is the gist of what needs to be known.
Right.
And that this is just another choice that I think you're right. They're going to drop the whole before Guild, after Guild timeline and just sort of commit
It's a
to
lot to
10,000
explain.
years.
In their defense, it's a lot to explain.
Yeah, we spent like 2 hours across 2 episodes trying to explain it on this very podcast. Denis Villeneuve did not have the time to get into that in his movie.
What? I think he should release a 2-hour prequel where it's just about... Yeah.
No. Don't do that, Denis. Don't put us out of business.
Right.
Leave the deep lore cuts to us.
Right.
Now, at the breakfast table, like we mentioned earlier, Jessica asks Paul to use the voice to make her hand over the glass of water that she just poured for him. It establishes this relationship between Paul and his mother, this idea that she has been training him in her secretive Bene Gesserit ways. And Paul, being the teenager that he is, he's around 15, 16 years old
Right.
in this movie, his response is truly iconic. And I quote, "Mom, I just woke up." End quote.
Same, Paul.
So good.
So good. We also get in this scene some really fun little Easter eggs. We get a painting of the old Duke, Leto Atreides' father, Paul's grandfather, in his matador bullfighting getup, which, of course, led to his downfall, immortalized as a tiny, trinket statue.
Yeah, it's a little metal statue.
Yeah, which is cool. And we see that statue symbolically throughout this first third of the movie. And I did want to say, this scene really stuck out to me the 4 times I've seen it now. Because when Paul finally commits to using the voice to make her pass the water or try, it really, for me, through the sound design, through the way that the camera focused on Paul and his gaze, this, in my opinion, perfectly shows the focus, the sort of attention to minutia, the kind of Bene Gesserit registration that they have to go through in order to effectively use the voice on a target. All of that comes together in this beautiful moment, and I love that Paul speaks, but you don't hear it until a second later. Ugh.
Yeah.
Chills. Absolutely.
Yeah, the sound design and the creative choice around how the voice works, really well done.
So good. Love it.
Yeah. Now, after breakfast, Paul gets to studying, folks. He is reading, quote unquote, / watching a film book, this holographic projection, and we hear the voiceover of the narrator of this film book, filling all of us, the viewers, in on some very helpful exposition.
Yeah. I mean, this film book narrator, gives us some of these terms that we're going to become very familiar with visually in a few moments. Giant sandworms called Shai Hulud and the blue eyes of a bat, which scratched all of my itches as a hyper Dune nerd. Because I'm like, yeah, use these words, get us familiar with hearing them so that we can use them in conversation later.
Yeah, eyes of a bat was one thing I did not expect to hear in this movie. I figured they would try and simplify some of the complex terminology because, again, there's just so many terms thrown so quickly at you in the book in just the first couple of pages.
Yeah.
I expected them to drop some of the more obscure ones that don't even get used that often. But here we go. Eyes of Ibad. We got it right here from the narrator. In addition to some exposition about Arrakis, we also learn through this film book about the value of spice in this galaxy. We learn about the health benefits that it provides, how it extends lifespans for people who consume it, and how, and this is big, how it's the key to the way the Spacing Guild navigates its ships across the galaxy safely and at light speed.
Right.
And if you want to learn way more about the spice melange, we actually dedicated an entire episode about it. It's spoiler free. So definitely go check that out if you want to go deep on the spice melange, because there's so much more to it.
Now, speaking of a highliner navigating ships to and from, the next shot takes us to a highliner in space. And it's this big tubular thing.
Tubular, bro.
Super tubular, bro. That's how the guild steersmen speak. They're like, yo, what's up, bro?
They're all like punk, like skate park bros.
All right, I'm going to like negotiate your freedom, but first check out this kickflip, bro. Everyone's like, dope.
Hand over the spice, bro. Hand over the spice.
We get this boba straw of a spaceship floating in space, and this tiny, insignificant little speck flies out of it.
Yeah.
And we go, oh, what a tiny, insignificant, oh my God, it's huge.
Oh my God, right.
Because that little speck in space, which is a pixel next to this 4K spaceship, lands in front of humans, and it's baffling. It's
enormous.
The size of a skyscraper and then some. It is unfathomably big. And we're back to this whole conversation about scale. Villeneuve absolutely succeeds at conveying to us how big some of this technology is. Although, again, like you said earlier, it is kind of hard to keep your head wrapped around that because it is just so big and so vast.
Right. Now, this is an Imperial ship, and an Imperial envoy has been sent because the Atreides, as we learn, have been ordered to take over Arrakis. There's a lot going on in this scene, from this massive ship and the group that comes down from it, including those orange helmeted guild members, is what we can assume.
Right.
A lot of folks coming down from this ship and a lot happening in this scene. So let's kind of break it down a bit.
Now, the royal family, the ducal family, is dressed to the nines. These folks, They've got the drip. Everyone's looking sweet. Especially, Jessica with the shawl, the little Bene Gesserit embroidered shawl. Oh, yeah. Looking great. Looking so good. We get some fun banter between Oscar Isaac, a.k.a. Leto Atreides, and Josh Brolin, a.k.a. Gurney Halleck. You know, that whole smile, Gurney. I am smiling.
I am smiling. So good. They got to laugh in our theater for sure.
So good.
Now, Duke Leto also turns to his mentat, Thufir Hawat, and asks, how much, Thufir, do you think it cost the Emperor to send this envoy for this silly formality? And Thufir's eyes kind of go blank in this scene as he does his mentat calculations in his mind.
Right.
And the answer, 1.5 million Solaris is what the Emperor spent.
My God, could have been an email, really embodied by that price tag. Also, this is definitely like a Hey Siri moment, Leto being like, also, Thufir, can you set a timer? I've got some like rice on the stove. I just want to make sure it doesn't burn. Thufir's eyes go white. Right. He's like, timer set.
Well, if it was really a Siri moment, Thufir's eyes would go white, and then he would say, searching for, can you set a timer? These are the results.
Here's what I found on Safari.
Right. Here's what I found on Safari by doing a Google search.
I can't do that.
Competition.
Enable personal requests. Leto's like, remind me to reset your settings, Thufir. Jesus. Now, in the book, Paul is confirmed to have had mentat training.
Right.
It doesn't come up in the movie, so it's unlikely, but I would love to see at some point, Timothy slip into that similar trance, eyes white, mentat trance. The fact that he is a mentat plays a bigger part in Dune Messiah, and the sort of rumor mill is that is a direction that maybe Villeneuve is looking, right, to kind of complete this story.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it, you got to do it at some point, and I would love to see that effect. But we don't see it in this movie, which is fine. It's good. Again,
right.
Streamline, focus on the story. We don't have, as much as I would love it, we don't have 7 hours to spend celebrating every tiny little thing.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the Herald of the Change, this Imperial envoy.
Yeah.
Sorry. He unfurls this comically large scroll that he's carrying.
I don't know. Could have been bigger. Really, honestly, like, what is that, the pocket-size edition? Yeah, Jesus, dude, come on. The people in the back are going to have trouble seeing it. Get a grown-up size.
Right. So he unfurls this massive scroll and reads out the royal decree that House Atreides has been commanded by the Emperor to take over rule of Arrakis. And Duke Leto, in response, gives a truly iconic speech, and we heard this in the trailers as well.
Right.
Quote, "We are House Atreides. There is no call we do not answer. There is no faith that we betray. The Emperor asks us to bring peace to Arrakis. House Atreides accepts."
Atreides! So good.
Yeah, it's totally an epic scene.
Right.
But thinking of it from the Imperial Envoy's point of view, I think he was just looking for a yes or no.
I do imagine, hey, ask me if I want to join you for lunch.
Hey, Leah, do you want to go get lunch sometime?
I am Leo Wiggins. There is no call I do not answer. There is no faith that I betray. You asked me to join you for lunch. I accept. Leo. Yeah. And voice like...
Except there's no crowd behind you. It's just a pre-recorded thing on your phone that you hit play on.
I do keep that ready at all times. Just... yeah.
Honestly, though, a great way to accept a lunch invitation. Let's get tacos.
Yeah.
Now, the scene wraps up with some signatures being signed on paperwork and Duke Leto using his signet ring to put his official seal on that massive scroll, I assume. But while all of that paperwork signing is happening, there are some notable shots here of Jessica and Moheim sort of making eye contact, clearly communicating without words in some way, not telepathy necessarily, but just kind of making eye contact here, and both looking over at Paul, acknowledging that, there's something going on here.
Right.
And to me, this was just some foreshadowing for the Gom Jabbar scene to come. Just some acknowledgement that the Bene Gesserit and Jessica know something about Paul and that he is special.
Yeah. It can be tough sometimes to see like what is in the movie and what am I seeing because of my understanding of the story. I had a similar moment where, Moheim looks over at Leto as he's sealing the acceptance thing with that ring. And if you're just watching it as a moviegoer, you've been told that she is there as a representative of the Bene Gesserit to kind of officiate as well, right? To bear witness to this acceptance. So you see this shot of Duke Leto pressing his ring and she's in the background watching intently. And then as he finishes, she walks away. Sure, that's a totally complete understanding of what just happened. But there is also this element of, we know from the book that she knows that he is basically signing his own death sentence in that moment, right?
Yep.
On Arrakis, there is hope for Paul, but for the father, there is no hope. He is going to die. With that in mind, that little glance was so poignant for me. And if you also got that interpretation, let me know so that I don't feel alone.
Right. No, I totally get it. It was very hard to watch this movie without constantly thinking of all the extra context that we know from the book and that we know from all of our studying of the extended lore. Very hard to watch this movie and be like, what did Denis mean by that?
Right.
Because it could mean 12 different things based off what I know about Dune.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
this is going to come up again later with the little beetle and Jason Momoa. But
indeed.
Anyway, speaking of Jason Momoa.
Hey.
Our next scene, we see a ship fly over some Caladan water and return from a test flight. And this is our introduction to Duncan motherfucking Idaho, played by Jason Momoa.
So good. Honestly, one of the highlights of the movie by a margin.
Agreed.
Duncan Idaho's character in this story is so well understood and well displayed for us as the audience. And amazing to get some movie-only scenes that show us that Denis and the rest of the team understand that Paul is good friends with Duncan Idaho, right? Like that they understand that one of Paul's main teachers, his master, his sword master, is going to be someone he is like an older brother to him or like another father figure to him, and will then add a lot more emotion when Duncan later dies,
Yeah. Now, in this little conversation that Paul and Duncan have, Paul opens up to Duncan. And again, Another clue into how close their relationship is. Paul's not walking around telling everybody that he has these weird dreams about this girl in the desert. But he does tell his close friend and mentor, Duncan. And he tells Duncan that he saw something else as well. He knows that Duncan is being sent early to Arrakis. And Paul tells him, take me with you because I saw a vision or had a dream of you lying dead in battle.
Right.
And I want to come with you. I want to try and prevent this. Obviously, he cares about Duncan. And Duncan brushes it aside. Quote, dreams make good stories, but everything important happens when we're awake. End quote.
Yeah. Through that sort of layperson wisdom, Duncan's kind of missing the point that I think this is the main fucking character and may or may not be prescient. So, take it seriously. But it is also the case that Duncan Idaho is the sort of character where if he knew that he would give his life to protect Paul, he would in a heartbeat. So
definitely
might not actually change anything. Although I do like his little, first of all, I'm not going to die. God damn, the confidence on this guy's fucking hot.
Oh, God, just dripping off of him. Yikes.
Shee.
All right, the next scene.
Yeah.
The next scene is honestly maybe my favorite scene in the entire movie. And I know that's bold to say, considering like we're still in the first like half hour of a 2.5 hour movie.
Right.
I loved this scene and it broke me time and time again. And even on a rewatch, I was like, oh God, I can barely get through this scene without tearing up.
Yeah.
It's Paul and Leto at the graves, presumably the graves of their predecessors and family members, other Atreides. And I think this is the scene where it's so clear. In addition to that Duncan scene we just saw, this scene solidifies how well the creative team behind this film understands the universe and its characters. Just this conversation between Leto and Paul, the way Leto opens up, the way Paul is doubtful, all of it is just so good and not in the book. Like this scene directly isn't in the book. There is a scene where Paul and Leto have a conversation, but the dialogue is quite different. Doesn't matter. They still captured exactly what Duke Leto's about and what Paul's about here.
But I think what they did capture is that Duke Leto, like it captures the essence of Duke Leto's relationship with his son that we learn in that scene that's not in this movie, right?
Yeah.
He's being vulnerable with Paul in a way that Paul had never seen before is the whole...
Yes.
That's like the deeper takeaway from
point.
That scene.
Right.
And in this movie, the same thing, but functionally for the audience, we get to learn more about Paul has not considered fully taking over House Atreides. He doesn't feel ready to be Duke next and doesn't even want it, really. Wants to adventure with his buddy Duncan Idaho. Who can blame him? Yeah,
can't blame him there. Now, in this scene, we also hear Duke Leto's iconic desert power policy, his plan for Arrakis, his idea of capturing the power of the desert, specifically creating an alliance with the Fremen people, which everyone else underestimates. But Duke Leto and Thufir have been chatting and think there might be more than meets the eye with the Fremen. And so they want to establish a connection with them, and that's what Duncan has been sent to do in this advanced party, is connect with the Fremen. Now, the way that Duke Leto bonds with his son here is what really broke me in this scene. Like you mentioned earlier, the way he sort of opens up to his son and is vulnerable in a way that he maybe isn't to anyone else.
Right.
It just broke me. There's a great quote that Duke Leto says. A great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it. And he answers. And if your answer is no, you'll still be the only thing I ever needed you to be. My son. And then he continues.
Yeah.
I found my own way to it. Maybe you'll find yours. End quote. Wow. Just him revealing that he never wanted the ring.
Right.
He didn't want to be Duke. He wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah.
Just opening up to his son in a way. Also cool for him to mention that he's a pilot here, because we see him pilot an ornithopter later. I could go on and on about this scene, but this was just such a beautiful, tender moment between father and son. Some grade A, S-tier parenting happening here from Duke Leto Atreides. Unconditional love, understanding, empathy, sincerity. He's doing it all. It's incredible. Love this scene so much. And if this is not the scene where you're sold on Duke Leto Atreides, I don't know what else could do it.
Right. The next scene we get is the sparring scene with Gurney Halleck. And
Iconic.
another iconic scene, indeed. Really, really done well. Probably one of my favorite examples of just clean action choreography in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first time we're seeing the personal shields, too, which, seeing that little tap on the pad and then it buzzes to life. So freaking cool.
So cool.
And we get this great, not only does Paul immediately show us how it works, where he kind of taps his hand and it flashes blue, and then he slowly pushes the knife to his palm and it goes red. But also then, during the fight, right, I think Gurney says to him, the slow blade penetrates the shield, end quote. So
right.
It's very clear this is how shields work in Dune. There are a couple of lines missing from this scene that we both are huge fans of. The mood. What does mood have to do with it? Line, right?
Yeah. It's still there in the movie, but it's been shortened and adjusted a little bit. In the longer version of it, Gurney says mood is for lovemaking and for cattle.
Right.
In this, he just says, what does mood have to do with it? You fight when the necessity arises.
Right.
No mention of lovemaking or cattle, damn it.
I will say about Gurney's character, I love Brolin's performance, especially you haven't met a Harkonnen. They're brutal.
Yeah.
So
good.
Electric, so good. They did broadly make Gurney Halleck less of the trickster troubadour that he is in the book.
Yeah.
In the book, he's kind of witty, sarcastic. He's always making a joke. He's always got a twinkle in his eye. In this movie, he's definitely a little bit more dour, but, it's also a part of his character. And it is hard to show more dimensions of a character without putting them on screen for more time. And the movie is already long and already has a challenge to show this much story. So I don't know that there's an elegant solution to this other than just he's a little different in the movie and you get it.
Right. And it's not like he doesn't have his moments either. They use that dourness for some comedic effect throughout the movie here and there.
Totally.
There's that one moment where he's taking a prisoner. I love it.
I love it. Yeah, you do. Look at him. It's his favorite thing.
Now, the fight choreography in this scene, you kind of mentioned this a little earlier, is really stellar.
It's so
The
good.
fight is intense, and we really get a sense that Gurney is pushing Paul to his limits here, just like he does in the book. He's really pushing Paul to fight for, quote unquote, his life. Because Gurney, of course, knows they are headed to Arrakis. They are headed towards real danger, and the young Duke needs to be ready for anything.
Right.
And in fact, Josh Brolin's delivery here, when he tells Paul about the danger that they are heading towards, about the Harkonnens that they will face, is amazing.
Yeah.
He is just dripping with venom and pain when he delivers the line, quote, "You never met Harkonnens before. I have. They're not human. They're brutal."
It's so good. I also love in the same little moment, right? He's like, your eyes. I need to see it in your eyes. It's oh, it's so good. That idea of no, fucking listen to me, Paul.
Right.
Take
right.
me. And then it ends with this sort of beautiful little head clasp moment where it's tough love, but it is 100% love.
Right. Comes from a place of deep care and love for his young Duke. Now, one small note before we move on from this scene. We did dedicate an entire episode here on the podcast to Gurney Halleck and his life before the pages of Dune and what led him ultimately to this position of working alongside Duke Leto and being one of Paul's mentors and friends. If you're interested in Gurney Halleck as a character and learning more about him and his, frankly, really dark, horrific past with the Harkonnens, definitely go check out that spoiler-free episode all about Gurney Halleck's life.
Indeed. Now, the next shot takes us to Giddy Prime, where Baron is taking a steamy bath, body on full display, looking great. This is, presumably, Harco City, and Raban arrives basically to inform the Baron, you know what, we got all our guys off the planet. By the way, fucking angry about it. Why did they take our planet? And God, Dave Bautista really brings, in his delivery and his line reads here, really brings that sort of like violent, but also kind of chaotic and hard to predict energy that really,
Yeah.
this is the guy who would like start a fight over nothing.
Yeah. Dave Bautista really bringing it. He has very few speaking lines in this movie, and Raban doesn't have a massive role in this film, but he has presence whenever he's on screen.
Right. I do love, tiny little note here, I love that when Raban walks up, Peter de Vries, who is kind of like done dirty by this movie in a way.
Yeah, he is.
It's like Peter is one of the characters who I most feel like isn't even in the movie, you know?
Totally.
But Peter is, when Beast Raban walks up, in a mentat trance, just kind of doing some calculations. And I do love that tiny little reminder, this is why this guy is here, right? We saw Thufir do it earlier, so we as the film goer, we know what it is. And it's a subtle little sign, hey, this is the human computer for this villain.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, here we go, folks. The scene where we get our name.
Yes.
The Gom Jabbar scene is next. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Moheim arrives with her fellow Bene Gesserit sisters to test Paul. And we get a sense that Jessica's allegiance here is maybe in question, because she wakes Paul up, asks him to get ready, tells him, hey, the Reverend Mother is here. She was my teacher at the Bene Gesserit school. She wants to talk to you about these dreams you're having. And Paul's like, how do they know about my dreams?
Like, wait a fucking second, Mom.
Wait a second, Mom.
Yeah.
I've only told you and Duncan.
Reverend Mother has some questions about your search history. What? How does she?
What?
Huh?
Was private browsing not on?
You fool, Paul. Always turn on incognito.
Yeah, exactly. It sows some distrust in Paul, and you can really see it on his face. Some really incredible acting here from Timothée Chalamet, just with his face.
Right.
He just is looking at his mom like, the fuck? Why'd you tell the Bene Gesserit about my dreams? And Jessica obviously dodges the question,
right,
which is even more shady.
Yeah.
And it's very clear to us, the viewer, and now to Paul, that she has been reporting back to her sisters at the Bene Gesserit about the fact that Paul is having these dreams/visions and could be the Kwisatz Haderach.
Right. Now, we're introduced in this scene to the physician, Dr. Yui, who is introduced to check Paul's vitals, which he does masterfully without any equipment, just with his hands.
No equipment necessary.
He's like,
the tips of his hands apparently are enough.
Has a pulse, I guess. I don't know. Again, this is, maybe all of the doctors in today's era are bad compared to future doctors who figure out, you know what, you can just sense their aura and everything's great.
Yeah. Just some sci-fi shit, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no reason to overthink that.
Now, in this scene, we also get an indication that the Bene Gesserit are maybe not a purely good organization. He warns Paul in Mandarin that, listen, the Bene Gesserits, they say they're in it for the good. They say that they're all good all the time, but they really are playing for themselves. So just be careful, right?
Right. They have their own designs, is what he says.
Right, right. Look out for yourself. And just as a side note, I love this addition of Mandarin into the world of Dune. Technically, in Dune, everyone's speaking Gallic, right? This kind of universal language, which is basically mostly English, with some other words kind of thrown in from different languages around the universe. But, you know, there are sci-fi series like, I think it was Firefly, was a sci-fi TV series where one of the two languages spoken out in space is Mandarin, because just the sheer number of people who speak that language is huge. And if you then take humanity off of Earth and spread them around the universe, just everybody all over, there are going to be other languages. So this idea of Paul speaking Mandarin with Dr. Yui, I loved it. I thought it was super cool. Really also indicated to us Paul is an educated young man.
Right. Now, obviously, the Gom Jabbar scene takes place, and Paul finds himself alone in the room with the Reverend Mother.
Right.
And the first thing she does is absolutely wreck him with a pristine, perfect use of the voice. It is so good.
It's incredible also because we see the voice a few times throughout the movie, but this is the only time that we get hit with the voice the way Paul is, kind of riding along for his perspective, right? She goes, "Come here, kneel," and we don't even see him walk over. We see him arrive and kneel as he sort of comes to consciousness, having already done the thing that she told him to do. And that is honestly what makes this one of my probably like top 10 moments in the movie. Like,
Yeah.
just such a masterful use of audio editing and to show us like, yeah, what is it like to get hit with the voice, especially God in that IMAX theater. Your seat rumbles. It's incredible. It was quite a bit. I found myself kneeling in the movie theater. I was like, what's happening?
Yeah, again, the way they interpreted the voice in this film was so cool, but also just shows us how deadly the Reverend Mother is.
Right.
The fact that Paul had no choice but to instantly follow her command. Now, this scene was one that I was hoping they would get right because it is so pivotal, it is so iconic, and it's one that's kind of tough to do right. So I'm glad that here, Denis made it as book accurate as possible. We got the box of pain, we got the needle to the throat, and we got the imagery of Paul's burning hand, and it was all so well done. Timothée Chalamet does some incredible acting here in the box of pain scene where he just goes stone face at one point and the pain is coursing through him, but he stares Mohiam down and her eyes like suddenly go wide. Like, who the fuck is this kid? It's so good with the music just blaring.
The soundtrack kicks in. Yeah.
Yeah.
That like,
it's really, really good.
That progression, which again is just a testament to Timothy's acting, like the progression from the kind of chuckle of, I feel something, to the like gritting his teeth, like can barely stand it. And then he just gets to the other side of that agony where it's probably even hard to put into words or into like a visceral expression, how much it hurts. And that's the point where he just goes, you know what? No. What's up? What's up, Mohiam? Hi. Like, nice to meet you. Now, as Paul goes through that journey in the room, Jessica's outside and she recites to herself the iconic litany against fear. Everyone's favorite quote from Dune.
Yes. So good. And glad to see it make it into this movie. I mean, we knew it would. It is just so iconic that you can't imagine that they would cut that from the movie, but a really strong place to bring it in here. She's out here fearful for her son's life in there because she knows how painful that test is. It's a test that she herself has undergone during her own Bene Gesserit training at the school. And as a mother, that's got to be painful.
I also, that is something that I think we will appreciate as book readers that the average person won't, because I don't know that they make it clear that Jessica had to go through that same test in the movie.
Totally.
But I definitely got that from Rebecca's performance, this idea of remembered pain and remembered trauma in addition to, like, my son is going through this and I can't stand. But, oh my God, the look that she gives when Mohiam calls her back in. She opens the door, eyes down, and looks up and sees Paul standing proud, prominent in the middle of the room, alive and human. It's
shivers.
It was so, like, again, just the way that her expression softens, heartbreaking, and really a testament to, I came out of the movie the first time going, Oscar Isaac, Oscar Isaac, Oscar Isaac. But the more that I've seen the movie, the more I repeat Oscar Isaac, but also the more that I'm drawn to the performances of people like Rebecca, because she just so delivered where it mattered in just so much. It's great.
I agree. Okay, let's wrap up this iconic scene. We get a incredible bit of exposition from Mohiam now that Paul has passed the test. She says, quote, "If you had been unable to control your impulses like an animal, we could not let you live. You inherit too much power. And Paul asks, because I'm a duke's son. And Mohiam's reply is so good.
Yeah.
Because you are Jessica's son. You have more than one birthright, boy. So good.
So good. Yeah.
Amazing.
It's so, again, really shows that they understand the nature of the characters and the relationships because, again, if you word for word, like, did these scenes, you wouldn't get that same understanding out of it. So cool to see how they're leaning into this sort of the effect and the influence of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood in this universe so that the average viewer can see this and go, oh, wow, I think they're a big fucking deal.
As they are. Yeah, exactly. Now, in this scene also, we get a little conversation about Paul's prescient abilities. Mohiam asks him, do you often dream things that happen just as you dreamed them? And Paul's response is just so good and a change from the book, and I think a change for the better. He responds, not exactly.
Right.
Which is different from the book. In the book, he just says, yes. Mohiam asks the same exact question in the book, and his response is yes. I love that they changed it to not exactly, because that is so much more accurate knowing what we know about his prescient abilities, what we learned later in the book and even in this movie about the pitfalls and inaccuracies that he sees in those visions. He is not seeing perfect visions of the future. He is seeing infinite realities and possibilities, and things don't always play out like he sees them. So just another example, one of many in this film, that the team behind this movie knows and understands this universe on a deep, deep level.
Yeah, it's a huge part of this plot, this idea that his visions are inconsistent and he sees himself die is not signaling to the audience he's going to die, or even it's likely he's going to die. It's just, that's possible. And honestly, it's kind of Mohiam being ignorant here, where she's like, he's not getting accurate predictions. It's like, sorry, Mohiam, the future's fucking complicated, all right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Clear that the creative team is making some very, very smart decisions regarding how this power is communicated.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the Gom Jabbar scene wraps up, and Mohiam and her Bene Gesserit sisters leave. It's a very foggy day on Caladan today.
Right.
And this scene is so important to establish the Bene Gesserit and some of their plots and schemes. That breeding program gets a mention. The Kwisatz Haderach is name dropped here in this scene. Very important to establish these things for someone who is watching this movie without knowledge of the book, someone who is new to the Dune universe. This scene does that well.
I also really appreciate, she kind of scolds Jessica and says, listen, like, we've done what we can, but he might fuck up and your son might die. So don't celebrate yet. He may be the Kwisatz Haderach, but maybe not. And you know what? We have other candidates. We have other options.
Yeah, really building up the stakes here in this scene. And Paul overhears all of this and confronts his mother in a very visually striking sort of back and forth dialogue sequence where both Paul and his mom are sort of obscured in this thick fog. And obviously the visual storytelling here is telling us that there's some separation now between Paul and his mother. He's starting to understand the larger truth of what his mom has been up to. He's questioning his mother's allegiance, and they're maybe not seeing each other and understanding each other clearly, just as the foggy visuals imply.
Also, side note, love the description of what a Kwisatz Haderach is. Like, what a confusing term, but Jessica saying, no, a mind so powerful it bridges space and time.
Yeah.
Boom. Done.
Done.
Easy. Like,
what a great summry of a very
Frank.
complex idea.
Why couldn't you give us that, Frank? You gave us 9 definitions of it, and they're all confusing.
Right. And I have to read 6 books to understand it.
Yeah. So anyway, just wanted to, I thought that description was very, not only easy to process, I think, for the average person, but also, I think, accurate and did a great job of doing what it needed to do.
Right. And so then we wrap up Act 1. We are finally departing from Arrakis. We get some really stunning shots of Timothy Chalamet looking mopey and appropriately downtrodden as he says goodbye to his home planet, and some ships take off into space, leaving Arrakis. And I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, Leo. I can't recall, but the scale in this movie, enormous. Those ships leaving Arrakis are fucking huge.
Yeah. The shot of just the ship emerging from the ocean, like an actual island.
So cool.
It's
yeah.
So incredible. So we are now, just like young Paul Atreides, going to go to Arrakis, Act 2 of Villeneuve's beautiful vision. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. So hang out, and we'll be right back, right after these messages.
Alrighty, welcome back, folks. I hope your trip to Arrakis was as smooth as ours. Let's get to it. Arrakis and Arrakeen. This is where the danger starts to take shape. A lot of Kaladin was introductions to our characters, setting up some of the scenes and hinting at some of the plots within plots taking place. Here's when those plots begin to unfurl.
Now, as always, as is appropriate for arriving on a planet, our first shot is another boba straw, is another tubular lipstick tube.
Tubular bro.
A highliner above Arrakis, and hundreds of teensy-beensy little tiny ships, couldn't be bigger than a tennis ball, each of them probably, flying towards the planet. And we go, cool, yeah, those are small. And then we see them and surprise, they're not. They're huge. They are nearly the size of Manhattan, each of them. It's insane. But we get this internal shot with each of the characters kind of preparing themselves for this arrival.
Yeah.
Jessica and Leto take each other's hands, and it's lovely. It's this sweet little moment. We also get this shot. We get this shot of Gurney Halleck reading a tiny book. And when I saw this tiny book, my first thought was OC Bible.
Yeah, same.
That was my first. But I was a little bit surprised once I had the ability to pause. This appears to be a religious text, but it's in German. The whole thing, or at least the 4 pages that we see. Now, between the kind of blurry frames, the old-fashioned font, not good at reading that. Please give me some Helvetica or I don't know, even Comic Sans is more legible than those old timesy.
Sans serif, bro.
Sans serif, please. Sans squigglies. Still, it does seem pretty likely that this is the OC Bible, printed in German, auf Deutsch. But I had to use some Google Translate and some squinting and some real guesswork on German spelling. I would say if you are a German-speaking fan of Gom Jabbar and you feel ever so inclined, the timestamp on these sort of shots of the little book, the tiny book, is at 35 minutes and 6 seconds on HBO. So if you take a look and you understand it and you can confirm, yes, this is the OC Bible, or you know what, this is just a verse from some other known text, let us know. GomJabbarPodcast@gmail.com, especially if you speak German. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, help us translate that, please.
Yeah.
So the Atreides take their first steps onto Arrakis in this formal arrival ceremony, and Paul is greeted by the Fir Hawat.
Yeah.
And they hug it out.
Yeah. Grandpa.
Very cute moment. Yeah.
I also love a tiny little detail, which is that Gurney, who kind of leads the charge after the bagpipe player, stops, turns, and helps Jessica step off the Atreides ship. And it is such a tiny little moment. It's barely even shown on camera. But what we know from later in the book, that they have this kind of familiarity and this friendship.
Yeah.
It's such a small little detail, but I appreciate it all the more so because it is so small and could be overlooked.
Yeah, I noticed that little detail as well. I love that they added that.
Yeah.
Now, as Paul and his mother walk to their ornithopter, the locals who have gathered to watch the arrival of the Atreides start yelling, Lisan al-Gaib, Lisan al-Gaib.
Right.
And Jessica in the ornithopter explains to her son what that means.
Right.
Quick note about the ornithopter itself, by the way. I freaking love this design.
Yeah, it's so good.
They captured it perfectly. It's really hard when you're reading the book to imagine, okay, it's a helicopter, but the wings are flapping.
But they flap.
Described in a very dragonfly shape.
Right.
I don't know how that would even work. in like a big metallic structure.
And they have jets, I guess?
Yeah. It's just hard to picture that, at least for me, while reading the book. And now it's easy to picture it because they freaking nailed it.
Yeah.
I love it. It's got that dragonfly body. It's got the flapping wings, but it's also very metallic and looks like a vehicle of war and transportation might look.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely didn't go the heart mollusk route.
No heart mollusks in sight,
Yeah,
but
no.
I can forgive them that little detail.
How dare they? That's where I draw the line.
I will be sending Denny a lengthy email about that at some point, but
Yeah.
I digress. Yeah, ornithopters are looking good. But in the ornithopter, Jessica is busy explaining to Paul what Lisanal Guy means, voice from the outer world. She's basically explaining how legends and myths have been planted here among the locals, and they see signs in Paul that he may be the one. The same signs that the Bene Gesserit potentially see. There's something special about him. And Paul is still clearly distrustful of his mother after that whole affair with the Gom Jabbar.
Right.
And he makes a pretty astute observation here. Quote, they see what they've been told to see. End quote.
Right.
Oh,
Spot on, Paul. Nice.
nice one.
Yeah.
That is so good.
That's astute as fuck, dude.
Astute as fuck, bro. I appreciated that the movie kept some of that idea of missionaria protectiva. While we didn't exactly hear those words in this movie, the legends that have been planted here, the manipulations by the Bene Gesserit many centuries ago, as we know about from the books, all of that, while not explicitly stated, is still in this movie.
Right.
And Paul here even calls it out. These people have been told to believe in a Messiah that may or may not look or act like me. Of course, they're going to think I'm the special. That doesn't make me special.
Right. Right.
It's part teenage rebellion and part him being incredibly observant about what's going on here and kind of seeing right through the Bene Gesserit manipulations on Arrakis. I loved it. Such a good line.
It's such an important theme in Dune, this idea of like power and information as manipulation. So having it is key, and they definitely didn't drop the ball there.
Yeah.
This next kind of scene, we get this flight into Arrakeen, and we get to see this sort of approach to the city. And Thufir points out the shield wall. Now, the way that the timing of this line works out, it really seems like he's talking about the giant man-made wall that is surrounding the city.
Right.
Which in the book, it's like a barrier reef. It's literally a organic structure of rock that just happens to shield this place where they then decided to build a city because it's like a safe haven from the storms. This might be a difference. This might be a change. It's going to get blown up at the end fucking anyway. So it doesn't super matter. But that being said, the shield wall defends the city from storms, but also worms. And as they are flying to Arrakeen, they do pass a number of these kind of big mountainous rocks that we don't see once Paul and Jessica are in the desert proper.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe this was, they are maybe talking about the rocks, but just on the editing floor, it got pushed back a bit, or maybe that man-made wall is part of a larger stone structure and it's just been reinforced with, I don't know. There's some confusion there. Might be a change that they made from the book. Could also just be some of the ambiguity around, we don't see Thufir pointing at a thing. We just hear his line and we see the environment that they're in.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It is a little ambiguous what Thufir is exactly referencing here.
Right.
But regardless, I'm glad that he did reference it because it will play an important role in part 2, as we know.
It's got to get blown up.
Gotta get blown up. Now, after a quick ornithopter ride over Arrakeen, we are officially moving in, and Leto and Gurney have a short scene standing on a balcony overlooking the city.
Right.
And their conversation basically serves to reinforce the importance of spice and to really give the viewer a sense of the danger that House Atreides is in. We see how desperate Duke Leto here is.
Yeah.
He's pointing out we need to protect that and we need to protect that because if we don't, we're dead in the water here.
Right.
And we recognize how desperate a position the Atreides find themselves in.
We then get the hiring scene where Jessica conducts a deep and thorough interview of multiple candidates, giving everyone a fair shot at this prestigious job. Just fucking kidding.
Right.
She basically chooses Shadout because she's got a knife on her. She like goes down this line of ladies, and these are all potential handmaidens or like potential servants. And she stops at Shadout Mapes, shout out to Shadout.
Yeah.
And it's like, yo, what are you called? And she's like, I'm called Shadout Mapes. And she's like, dope. Everyone else you can
You can leave now.
Which has got to feel shitty if you're like the next person over and your name is way cooler.
Right.
And she just stopped short of you. It's fine. Whatever.
Yeah. Look, lesson learned, okay? I'll take a knife to my next job interview. If it'll get me the job.
Keep it in your bodice. Yeah. And be prepared with a pop quiz. You're like, do you know what this knife is called? And if they do, you get the job. That's just how it works.
Yeah. Amazing stuff.
And Jessica, of course, pulls out, frankly, something that I didn't expect to be in the movie, but I'm really glad it did.
Yeah. Same.
Chicopsa.
Right.
She fucking name drops the language Chicopsa in regards to Shadout, which is a Chicopsa word meaning well dipper.
Yep.
And is a job title. So this is like a Fremen term to describe the duty of someone who would like work in a house, which is kind of funny. It's like you go to a job interview and they go, what's your name? And you're like, what's the job? They're like, you're a lawyer. And they're like, cool. My name's Lawyer Wiggins. And they're like, hey, seems like you might be fit for this role. But anyway, cool that they're using terms like Chicopsa, even if they're not lingering on them, just makes it even cooler.
Yeah. Adds to the world building and dips into that dense lore that we love so much.
Yeah, totally.
Now, my feelings on this scene are a little mixed.
Yeah, same.
I think this scene was always going to be a little tough to translate to the screen because in the book, like we discussed in our book club episode about it, there's a lot of subtext.
Yeah.
And thoughts racing through Jessica's mind that just don't translate to the screen.
Right.
As incredible a job as Rebecca Ferguson did acting in this movie, this would be just an impossible ask of an actor to be like, so you're thinking all of these things. Can you say that with your face without actually saying any of it?
And also you have 4 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just so you're right. On the page, it'll be like 6 paragraphs of thought and then it's a maker.
Right. And then Jessica will say like half a sentence.
Right.
And unfortunately in this scene, we basically only just view half that sentence. So it felt a little clunky to me. The maker transition and then Shadout Mapes screaming, I feel like totally made sense to me, right? Because I know the subtext. I know exactly what's going through Jessica's mind in this scene in the book.
Right.
I am very curious to know if the average viewer who doesn't know what's happening in this scene understands why Shadout freaks out at the word maker and does the whole thing with the knife. So it felt a bit clunky and awkward, but this, I think, was always going to be a tough scene to translate. So I at least commend the movie for not just cutting this scene or changing it dramatically. It is still shockingly accurate to how it plays out in the book.
Right.
It just doesn't quite translate perfectly.
There's also, gotta say it, that fucking guard in the background. Jessica very subtly hand gestures, be prepared for violence. Guard takes 3 full steps forward,
Shing?
pulls out knife, pulls out her kinjal, ready to fucking fight. I'm like, sorry, did you miss the subtlety class at like a tradies house guard school? What's happening right now?
I hand signaled you.
That's like when you as a kid tell your mom like, oh, that person's hair looks funny. And your mom goes, their hair looks funny? And you're like, Mom,
right.
Please,
Mom,
stop. Yeah. Guard definitely dropped the ball on being subtle.
Yeah.
Also, side note, we'll talk more about the Chris knives at the end because the Fremen cut themselves in one of the ending scenes. They cut themselves to make sure the Chris knives don't go resheathed without being bloodied, right? This is a cultural thing.
Yeah.
The Fremen don't unsheath and resheath them without getting blood on them. Shadout straight up does that. She unsheaths the Chris knife. Fine, sure. That's exactly what happens in the book. Cool. And then puts it back.
Yeah.
Without putting any blood on it.
Which is not what happens in the book.
No. In the book, Jessica reprimands Shadout for putting the knife away unbloodied. And Shadout's like, oh my God, kill me with it. That's what I deserve. And Jessica's like, yo, you're dramatic as fuck.
Chill.
Yeah, chill.
Have you met my guard? She's also dramatic. You two would really
She's
get
also,
along.
yo, you would be besties. You're just dramatic together. It's great. And she cuts Shad out right on like the upper part of her, I guess, chest or like breast. And this is when Jessica learns that Fremen blood coagulates really quickly.
Yeah.
So I like that scene in the book. Doesn't happen here. And at first I thought, oh, they're just not going to talk about the Chris knives needing to be bloodied before getting put away. But then they do later.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm
then
like,
we see it.
maybe Shadout's just a shitty Fremen. Like maybe she's just a bad, shitty Fremen in this adaptation. The other kind of cultural, not mistake here, but like it's kind of funny to think about is if an off-worlder sees a Chris knife and they haven't like earned your trust, they have to die.
Yeah. Oh, God.
So it does seem pretty likely that this jumpy guard is probably pretty short for time now.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. Jumpy dramatic guard.
Jumpy Janice.
Yeah, Jumpy
We
Janet.
knew you so little.
We never got to know her.
She was so jumpy. It was in her nickname.
That's
Jumpy
why
Janice.
everyone called her that. Yeah. Her last name was Janice. Her first name Jumpy. So she really grew into it. It was
With a name like that, you're kind of destined. All right. Moving on from that scene.
oh gosh. Yeah.
We join Paul outside of the palace. He's taking a little stroll in the midday sun.
Dangerous. Okay.
Yeah, not a good idea.
Uh-huh.
But, he's new to the planet. He's learning.
Sure.
We get some quick shots of some of the locals here. Some pretty heavy Islamic imagery, which I appreciated, made it into the film. Some of that Islamic culture, Arabic culture that inspires so much of Frank's writing, especially on Arrakis.
Right.
We see some people kneeling and praying, using prayer beads. And then we cut to Paul speaking to the caretaker and standing by these date palms. And basically we learned that the date palms require a lot of water. Water is precious here, reinforcing the idea that water is life and death here on Arrakis. And we also learn that the caretaker says the palms shouldn't be taken down because they're more than just trees for decoration. They represent an old dream. And here's where we get our first hint of some sort of dream for Arrakis. And as we know, as book readers, this is obviously the Fremen dream of changing the face of Arrakis, of bringing about a lush green planet.
Yeah. And then we are brought to another iconic scene.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh.
Almost painfully tense, but so good. We are into the hunter-seeker scene.
Right.
We lead into this scene with some more audio from a mnemonic film book, and we see this beautiful mosaic of a sandworm, Shai Hulud, rearing beautifully. And we get to hear some kind of fun facts and world building from the narrator, from the film book narrator. Paul, chilling in his bachelor pad, beautiful headboard, no bed frame. So he's loving that close to the floor sleeping lifestyle.
Yeah.
And it's out of this beautiful, ornate, fish and water. This is a headboard that's described in the book.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to see it depicted so beautifully here. And he's lured by this little Muad'Dib kangaroo mouse. He kind of goes over to look at this little hologram. And then we enter the hunter-seeker via tiny little laser cut hole.
Yeah. And we saw a glimpse of the hunter-seeker in one of the earlier trailers, but scary scene.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So well done. This little bug-like instrument floating around, hunting and seeking for Paul. It's in the name, folks. And
yeah.
Paul immediately stands still. The light from the hologram playing across his face, reflecting in his eyes. Really gorgeous cinematography here. The music is so tense. I found myself holding my breath. Yeah. I knew what was going to happen, and I was still holding my breath during this scene.
I've read the book. I was still like, I hope he gets out of here.
Yeah. It was really well done.
Oh, my God. Yeah. And just as a very quick side note, hunter-seekers, right? These little remote-controlled, basically killing machines, just as like some fun background, were created by House Carino, current reigning emperor of the galaxy.
Yeah.
And to be very clear, they inject themselves basically into you. They burrow into you and they find a vital organ and destroy it from inside. Fucking terrifying. And I couldn't stop thinking about that as it got so close to Timothy's eye.
Yeah, oh my God, right up to it.
His beautiful, beautiful eyes. I was like, this is horrifying.
Yeah.
Maybe as the average viewer, you get, okay, this is dangerous. This is going to kill him. And of course, Timothy has that line after he grabs it. He says, the person controlling it has got to be nearby. So yes, the basics are there, but just as some extra background, it really is a horrifying piece of technology that we talked about at some point. I think we talked about it in one of the book clubs.
Yeah.
Maybe like the third book club episode in our Spice Morsels, I think.
Yeah, and I think in the Tech of Dune episode.
Right.
We have a lot of episodes, folks. We've lost track.
Check them out.
Now, obviously, the scene ends with Shout-Out Mapes entering the room, unawares of what's going on inside, and Paul jumping into action, crushing the Hunter-Seeker, saving her life.
Right.
We don't get the exchange of Shout-Out Mapes thanking Paul and saying, you have saved my life. I owe you. Let me give you some information that I've heard. There is a traitor among you, among your people.
Right. Right.
Instead, we cut to a very sweaty Thufir.
Almost comically nervous looking.
Yeah. I loved how he was hamming it up. I loved it.
Yeah.
And basically, we cut to some quick action shots of Thufir and the Atreides guards discovering the dead Hunter-Seeker operator hidden within the walls. And what I find notable here, and maybe my biggest criticism of the film, like there are small, tiny quibbles I have with changes throughout the film that are not consequential and I can easily overlook. This is one thing that I am a bit hung up on, is the traitor plotline.
Right.
And how it is completely and utterly axed in this movie.
Right.
Shout-Out Mapes doesn't bring it up. There's no hints of Yui being the traitor ever in this movie until in a little bit he suddenly is.
Right.
And there's none of that tension of, is Jessica the traitor? Who's the traitor? Somebody among us is a Harkonnen plant. We need to find out who it is. All of that subtext, subplot is gone.
Right.
And I think that was too aggressive of a simplification of the beginning of this book.
Yeah.
Because I think the traitor plotline in the book, we obviously know from like chapter 2 who it is.
Right.
And there's a lot of dramatic irony in the book that builds tension. I think the movie didn't necessarily even have to reveal who it is, but they could have at least hinted at it. A very simple conversation in that earlier Baron scene during the steam bath of him saying to Piter or to Raban, we have someone within the Atreides ranks.
Right.
Someone who will betray them. Even something as simple as that to hint to the viewer that something is going on here would have added a lot more tension to these earlier scenes and built that out. So for me, that was a missed opportunity and a decision to maybe oversimplify a plot line and cut it entirely. I think they could have simplified it. You don't have to keep all of it in there.
Right.
I am bummed we didn't get Drunken Dunk in Idaho, but, cut that. It's fine.
Yeah.
But at least keep it in some capacity in a more streamlined form. And I think absolutely cutting it all together not only cheapens Yui as a character and his reveal later on, but it also actively hurts this first half of the movie where things are quite slow and it's a lot of exposition and a lot of build-up and setup.
Yeah, I agree. I agree somewhat. I agree that like in the steam bath scene, they could have had a line or two, and I think that would have been good for anybody who picks up on it. I do think that what makes tension happen is time left with that knowledge and time to observe characters and to wonder. Like that's the most delicious part of tension building is time with characters and going, oh my God, is it this person? Is it that person? And we simply don't have that time in the movie.
Right.
So I agree that like one or two sentences very easily could have been added. And also the thing is, I keep seeing shots from not scenes in the movie. And I wonder how many scenes were cut. And it's possible exactly what we're asking for is on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
Just because.
God, give me that director's cut 5-hour version, damn it.
I know. I would watch the fucking hell out of it. But already, I agree. I do miss that there is this whole traitor reveal and this sort of traitor buildup. And even the book doesn't really give you time to wonder, oh my God, who is it? But we do have time with Yui to go, is Jessica going to figure it out? Is someone going to figure it out? And Yui's just not in enough of this movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. Again, all of my major complaints about this movie really are about I want just a couple of extra scenes here and there. But already the pace at times can drag a little bit. And at the same time that I totally agree with what you're saying, I've also seen criticism that the first hour and a half is the time that people get most caught up and most enjoy the movie. And it's the later scenes that they feel drag. And I worry about suggesting adding more to the top half if that's already the part that moves along for the average viewer.
Yeah. It's a tough balance, right?
Yeah, it is.
Like, who are we to tell Denny what to do? He's a master of his craft. But this was just a omission that I very much noticed on my first viewing, and it was even more glaring of an issue on my second viewing.
Agreed.
When I was taking notes and being like, oh, wait a second, there's like no mention of Yui at all. He gets exactly, and I counted, 2 speaking scenes in this movie.
Right. He like grimaces when he gets killed. That counts. That's a SAG card.
That's true. That's true. Get your bag, my guy.
Get your bag. Well, what they didn't leave out of the book is this next incredible line.
Oh my God.
From basically Thufir trying to quit, which is hilarious.
Yes.
Because he's like, oh, I'm terrible. And I love Leto is like, you would deprive us of your abilities at this time.
Right.
And he's like, well, my honor demands, and fucking, I don't give a damn about your honor.
Oscar.
They tried to take the life of my son.
Oh, the delivery on that line.
Heartbreaking. The first 2 times I heard that, I literally teared up immediately just because it's so...
Yeah, same.
Oh, it's so pained. And again, knowing that Duke Leto Atreides is, if not the most honorable man in the galaxy, up there. He's high up there, folks. Him saying, I don't give a damn about your honor is so telling to his state of mind.
Yeah.
This idea of, I will risk it all for vengeance on whoever tried to kill my son.
So freaking good.
So good.
I love it. Oscar Isaac,
yeah,
as Duke Leto, honestly steals every scene he's in.
100%. Yeah.
I think he was easily one of the best top 3 parts of this movie.
Yeah.
Oscar Isaac brought it. And frankly, I need all of us in the Dune community to come together
yeah.
And find an Oscar for Oscar.
Hey.
Hashtag Oscar for Oscar, folks. He deserves it.
He deserves it.
He brought it in this film.
It's so true.
Okay, so next up we get a scene that is actually a movie edition.
Sure.
And I loved this scene so much. It was so good.
So good.
Baron and Piter meet with Moheim on Giedi Prime under a cone of silence.
Right.
And in this scene, they're basically talking about the conspiracy against the Atreides. And what this scene does really well is show us how closely, actually, the Emperor, the Bene Gesserit, and the Harkonnens are working together to take down the Atreides. It makes this conspiracy against our heroes feel that much more epic. That there are all of these power groups working against Duke Leto, working against the Atreides.
Yeah, but before you say too much about, like, the meaningful elements of this scene... Can we talk about that fucking
what about
spider
that spider,
thing?
though?
What about that spider, though?
It has human hands.
The people hands on that fucking spider thing. Really fucking weird.
Weird.
Especially because it's not in the book.
Not at all.
That's not a thing. That was a whole addition to this world. Now, I've got to think. My headcanon is it's a Tleilaxu thing.
Definitely.
Because, ew, gross. That's the kind of shit they would do. They're like, what if spider?
But human hands.
Human hands? I heard about a Spider-Man. Let's try our best.
But what about a man spider?
Man spider. Incredible stuff. I did also want to point out, jumped out at me in the credits, is credited somewhat.
Yeah.
Human spider proxy. So it's the person who kind of took place of the spider thing. And it was played by Milena Sidorova, who is, and this is true, she's a ballerina whose best work is called The Spider.
Oh my God, no way.
And it's funny because I've actually seen this. It's kind of a world-famous ballet routine, and you can look it up. It's incredible how she's able to move her body, and she did this incredible choreography. But Villeneuve was like, we need a spider. It's like the scene with Nick Fury calling Captain Marvel. He's like, I know just who to call.
Right. Somebody hand me my pager. Wow. Who knew that the spider went so deep the spider is played by a ballerina in a show called The Spider.
So good.
Wow.
Human spider proxy, folks.
Indeed. Milena.
Hashtag Oscar for human spider proxy.
Get that bag.
Get that bag,
I
Milena.
hope she got that bag for this.
Oh, I hope so.
And I hope she finds her way into more spider scenes. It seems to be her brand.
If we get Tleilaxu, she'll get there.
Oh, gosh. So funny. So weird. I loved it. Love to see those little additions to the universe.
Yeah.
Now, back to the conversation happening in the Cone of Silence, which, by the way,
right,
really cool representation.
Yeah. Oh, so cool.
This broad, bright beam of light shooting down from the ceiling, and then we, the viewer, suddenly can't hear the people talking. It's very muffled. We can't make out what they're talking for just a second until the camera cuts, and then we are also inside the Cone of Silence. Very smart filmmaking, very show not tell us about the Cone of Silence. It explains what it does without having to do some heavy-handed exposition.
Right, right.
Cool representation.
Also, reminder that Baron's palace has something like 20 of them.
Yeah.
Just all over. A lot of secrets in the Dune universe. This scene ends, right? The Baron, speaking to a truthsayer who can tell whether or not he's lying, says, "Oh, yeah, no, I'm not going to hurt them. You're good. Don't worry." And she goes, okay, and leaves. And then Piter's like, what? But you can't, what? And Baron's like, no, well, the desert will kill him. Like, basically, we'll set it up such that our hands are clean.
Yeah.
Which is just one for one, the book.
Yeah.
We get that in the book from Baron and Piter talking over bound Jessica, right?
Yep.
So without that scene, it makes sense that we get it here.
Totally.
And, of course, the scene ends with Baron.
Ooh.
Stellan Skarsgård, by the way.
Knocked it out.
Yeah. Unbelievably good as the Baron.
Yeah.
Says his final line, quote, "Arrakis is Arrakis, and the desert takes the weak. My desert, my Arrakis, my Dune." End quote, as he floats. It's so good.
So good, so creepy. Loved it. All right, speaking of Arrakis, we are back in Arrakeen Palace, and Duke Leto is getting to work. The staff meeting takes place after a bit of playful ribbing on Paul from his friend and mentor Gurney. Everyone sits down and starts talking shop.
Right.
And Thufir explains how the Harkonnens were taking in 10 billion Solaris per year.
Insane.
Off of the spice trade here on Arrakis. But the Atreides won't see profits like that for a while because the equipment that those Harkonnen bastards left behind is busted.
Right.
So it's going to take time to get operations up and running again. Duke Leto tells Thufir that he wants to see the spice harvesting in action. He wants to see it with his own eyes. And he wants the judge of the change, Liet Kynes.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Our first time referencing her.
Yeah.
He wants Liet Kynes to accompany them.
Right.
A quick aside here. I just want to shout out very briefly Thufir's cute little sun umbrella thing.
Yeah. His parasol. Yeah. It's lovely. It really brings out his lip tattoo.
Yeah.
It's great. Beautiful little accessory.
Yeah, I loved it.
Now, Thufir, speaking of him, puts his hand to his little receiver behind his ear. Also kind of a movie invention.
Yeah.
Don't really get anything like that in the book. And he goes, "He's here." And at first you think, oh, you're talking about the judge of the change? Nope. He's talking about Duncan motherfucking Idaho. God, he fucks. And he arrives. He kind of does this adorable, like, squat run up to, like, greet Paul.
Right.
Because they haven't seen each other in a while.
Yeah.
And, I think he says he spent 4 weeks living among the Fremen. And I just want to highlight how moving it is to see this shot of Duncan Idaho walking, Paul under his left arm, Gurney Halleck under his right arm, towards the camera. That little moment is just frozen in my mind and my heart because, God, 3 of my favorite characters of anything ever.
Yeah.
Just wonderful. And so wonderful to see them walking side by side, all together in this nice little moment.
Yeah, definitely. Now, in this scene, Jason Momoa reports to Duke Leto Atreides. He tells them what he saw in the siege communities. He tells them his estimate of how many Fremen actually exist on Arrakis, which is way more than what the Harkonnens thought, way more than what the Imperium thinks. The Fremen have been underestimated for a long time. And Jason Momoa, with some really great acting here, brings some levity to the scene here. He says, quote, "The Fremen watched me search for them for days. I never saw them. Finally, they sent a warrior out to kill me. And I gotta tell you, I have never come so close to dying." End quote.
I loved his delivery of that line. It was so good.
Yeah. I mean, my delivery was not near.
It's fine.
I'm no Jason Momoa, folks, as we all know.
None of us are. That's why he has a career. He's good at what he does.
Yeah, it's such a funny delivery. It's so cheeky, so on brand for Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah.
And, I appreciated having a little bit of a laugh in this movie, in this scene.
Also, clearly a euphemism for the Fremen fucking like demons and having to just fuck his way into those siege communities and throughout to earn their respect and their trust. Listen, it's got to be done.
Yeah.
It's a cultural exchange.
He's doing it for his Duke, right?
He's doing it for his Duke. And that leads us into one of our favorite scenes.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Probably, I think, objectively one of the best scenes in the movie.
Agreed.
Just from like technical and adaptation and everything.
Yeah.
Stilgar. Javier Bardem. It's so good. And it's also funny. And it's also light. And it's got some real great nuance to it. And I'll actually say really quickly, so we're talking about this scene, right, where Stilgar is introduced, right? He's the leader of the siege community where Duncan ended up, which we know as Siege Tabor. And Stilgar, from the moment that he walks in, is electric. And this comes down to like Javier doing so much. Little sounds, his little like affirmations, how he angles his head, how he's taking up space. Everything about Stilgar is so charismatic and fun. I loved every fucking scene this guy was in.
Yeah.
And I took the time because, what else am I doing these days? Tracking his eye line, right? He walks into the room. Gurney goes, "That's enough. Don't come any closer." And he just keeps walking.
Doesn't break stride, folks.
Doesn't break stride. Doesn't even look at Gurney yet. And stops and is just straight staring at Leto and kind of assessing the man. And looking at the positions of the people and then tracking his eye line, I wanted to highlight this little detail, easy to miss. He spends most of his time looking at Duke Leto, which makes sense, right? Who is this new off-worlder in charge of the planet? That's why he would come. That's why he would be there. He's a Fremen. He's practical, right? Nevertheless, the second most amount of time he spends, he looks at Paul, just looking at Paul, the young man in the room, but the Lisan al-Gaib, right? Potentially. He also takes a brief moment to look back and to the left of Duke Leto, which is to Duncan, Idaho, right?
Yeah.
The guy he's been basically working alongside, living with for the last month. I imagine this idea of reassessing the man. He's come to respect Duncan, Idaho. Here's Duncan, Idaho in his past job, in his current job as a man in the Imperium, and this kind of reevaluation. And that is so easy to miss. But to think about Stilgar and his character objectives and the things that he would find interesting in the way that he would connect with the people in the room, the fact that he straight up fucking ignores Thufir the entire time, 100% accurate to the character, to the subtext, something that's not even talked about in the book. But Javier does it with just flying colors. Again, probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole fucking thing.
So good. And something else he does super well. Spit on that table, baby.
It's great. You can spit on my table anytime. Yeah.
I loved that they expanded the spitting. It wasn't just Stilgar doing it, then Duncan did it in response, and then looks over at Duke, and there's just a silent moment, and then Oscar Isaac is just like...
Right. With the wind-up.
Wind-up. So funny. Such excellent comedic timing. I don't know if that naturally happened on set and they just kept it in the cut or if that was something that was planned. But either way, great decision all around. Whoever made that decision to do that. I appreciated getting these smaller moments of comedy.
Yeah.
In a movie that is otherwise very gloomy and dark, it was nice to get small moments of levity like this.
I also love just Oscar Isaac's facial expressions as he processes Duncan responding and then spitting, you can really watch the thought process of, okay, I'm just going to listen and figure, yes, and. He's like improv 101. He's just like, whatever happens, okay, we're spitting on the table. It's great.
So
such a good scene.
Freaking good.
Yeah.
Folks, hashtag Oscar for Oscar.
Yes, 100%.
You know Oscar Isaac would appreciate winning for spitting on a table.
For that best scene depicting spitting on a table. The
for
nominees.
Most excellent phlegm wind-up.
Human spider proxy. Dude.
Milena! So funny. All right, let's wrap up this scene. So there's some back and forth and negotiating happening between Stilgar and Leto. And it's clear that despite some of the tension in the room, Leto ends up making a very good impression on Stilgar.
Right.
And they come to an agreement, and Stilgar turns to leave. And as Stilgar turns to leave, Paul speaks up and invites him to stay for dinner or something, presumably. The dinner scene we never got in this movie. And
you want to stay for some tubular hang, bro?
And Stilgar is like, nah, dude, you should cut the dinner scene. I'm busy. I can't stay.
He's like, this movie is already really long. We don't have time for a whole dinner scene. Yeah.
Save it for the director's cut. And he actually says to Paul in Chicopsa, quote, I recognize you.
Yeah.
And that's it. I was a little confused by this line and why it was included. Do you have a read on this, Leo? Because I didn't really get this line. I don't know why Stilgar would recognize Paul in this moment or feel like he needed to say that.
Okay, I've got two theories.
Okay, hit me.
And neither of them are particularly strong.
Okay, yeah. Weird line, yeah.
One is simply that he is saying, I see you as who I've been told you might be. You are significant, and I recognize that, right? Just simply that. That's one possibility. Because so far in that scene, Paul hasn't been identified as the Lisan al-Gaib, but Stilgar spent some time looking at him. So I do imagine him going, yeah, I know, I'm on to you. I see you, right?
Yeah.
The other side of it is the term recognize is used a few times in Dune, and it's often has to do with like acknowledging someone's worth and like value. So it's possible that was like a thank you to Paul for being honorable. Because Paul earlier in the scene, right, he says, you off-worlders come to our place and take everything and give us nothing. And Paul goes, that's true, right? And Paul is sort of very quick to acknowledge the wrongdoing of past oppressors, right? The idea of saying, thank you. I recognize you as in you have value, you have honor. I respect that. Those are my two thoughts, maybe.
Okay. I love that. You know what? I will choose to believe both of those theories are true.
They're both true. Uh-huh. Yeah. Hire me, Denis. Let's work. Let's work together.
Great pitch. I love you shooting your shot.
Yeah.
All right. So Stilgar leaves. He says his thing. Both of the theories are true. And Gurney mumbles under his breath. And this was so funny.
Yeah.
He mumbles, but I don't like him.
I don't like him.
Which is not only funny.
Oh, you will.
Yeah, exactly. This is not only just like a funny throwaway line.
Yeah.
It's also just a perfect setup because we know that later in part 2, these two will actually become very close friends.
They're BFFs, dude. They've got friendship bracelets. Yeah.
Oh, I don't like him.
Oh,
you will, buddy. You will.
You will. You'll come around. Next up, we get Duncan basically just showing off his swag haul. He's like, look at all this shit I got. It's so dope.
He's doing an unboxing.
Yeah, he's doing a YouTuber unboxing. Cleanly shaven. I don't have mixed feelings about that. I like him with the beard.
Agreed.
But it's a small scene, right? Establishes for the viewer that the Fremen make some cool stuff. He gives Paul the paracompass, which ends up being very important later when Paul is tracking down Sietch Tabr.
Yep.
But also highlights that, you know what, these Fremen that everyone's underestimating, they are very much worth our respect. And although Gurney kind of gives him an old-fashioned sort of, oh, you've gone native, Paul is a lot more astute. Again, fucking astute as hell.
Yeah.
Going, you really respect them. And Duncan's like, you know what I do? They're incredible. They're part of the desert. The desert is part of them. They're courageous. They're honorable. All of these great qualities.
Yeah. They're ferocious in bed.
They're ferocious in bed. Oh, once you cross swords with a Fremen, if you know what I mean.
They fuck like demons.
They fuck like demons. I respect the hell out of them. And listen, they respect the hell out of him too, so for what it's worth. But we also see the sand compactor, which is a piece of technology that I could never picture to save my life.
Yes, same.
And it's so cool because we see it here, but then we see it used later. But incredible stuff. Love this little scene. It's a little bite-sized scene, but it's one that definitely shows. They're also like passing around drinks. I don't know. I kind of saw this as like the socialization.
Yeah.
You know, people hang out. They're friends. They're laughing. They're having a good time.
Yeah, exactly. Small little scene, but impactful nonetheless.
Right.
Okay, we get another iconic and major scene up next. The Spice Harvester trip.
So good.
We saw this in the trailers. You saw a little bit of this in your IMAX preview.
Yeah.
Now we got to see it in full, and whew,
Yeah.
boy, does it live up. I loved this scene. This is, frankly, the first, I guess, quote-unquote action scene of the movie, right?
Yeah.
It's been a lot of dialogue, a lot of espionage and politics.
Yeah, like there's the knife fight, but this is like much more of a set piece.
Yeah.
Like there's the sparring scene, but this is like a set piece. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Set piece is a much better word for it. It's big, it's bold, it's dramatic. Let's try and get through it. There's a lot to cover here
Sure, yeah.
in just the Spice Harvester scene. There are thrills and spills, y'all.
Aplenty. So many of them.
Aplenty.
Yeah.
So the first thing I noticed right off the bat was the carryall design.
Yeah.
The very unique carryall design. It's got those big balloons that inflate once it latches on to the Spice Harvester, and then they float it up into the air.
Yeah.
And then we get this shot in the desert of a carryall taking the Spice Harvester out to its location.
Right.
I didn't have any issues with the design. I thought it was a cool interpretation. It fit within the overall aesthetic that the film built for Arrakis and for technology in the Dune universe. And I liked it.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on that carryall?
I mean, in the past, carryalls have been described by different sources as like very large ornithopters. And there's something mechanically wrong about that. Just the idea of like, you can't really scale every type of technology infinitely. And the idea of something that could carry a spice harvester factory, which are like football fields long, just never really clicked with me. So the idea of something a little bit more like a dirigible or a blimp that uses, you know, the lift is just gas-filled bags. I think that's great. I think that's super cool. Also, canonically, Dune, Arrakis doesn't have the same gravity that Earth does. So the number of gases that would be able to lift something so heavy is probably actually higher, just as a side note.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I thought it looked cool. Also similar to the Harkonnen carryall. So it's possible the carryalls are more consistent in just, yeah, this is the best way to make one.
Yeah.
Doesn't really need to be as varied.
True. All great points. Dang, Leo. It's like you know Dune or something.
What? No. Is that the one by Jodorowsky?
Jesus. Now, fast forwarding in this scene a little bit, we're in the helicopter, we're out above the spice factory, and Duke Leto, with his sharp eagle eyes, spots the worm.
I love it. Although it is so funny to be like, is that a worm? And it's just like a desert mouse. They're like, no, that's a mouse.
That's a mouse, but damn, Leto, your eyes are good.
I mean, weird that you got them confused, but impressive. Very impressive. Yeah, but that he's like, is that a worm? And then Fremen, Leah Kynes, has to pull up binoculars. And she's like, oh shit, yes it is. Oh my God. All right.
Right. But the worm has been spotted. It's approaching. The harvester has been informed that the worm is here.
Right.
And a carryall does arrive in this version. In the book, the carryall is nowhere to be seen.
Yeah.
Presumably, it's been
either like lost or sabotaged, right? Like in the book.
Yeah, exactly. Presumably, the carryall in the books has been lost or sabotaged by Harkonnen spies or something. Here, the carryall does show up.
Right.
But could also have been sabotaged because one of the grips that is supposed to grab the harvester is broken.
Yeah.
It doesn't latch properly.
Right.
And now we're in an emergency situation. Worm is arriving. The harvester has no way of getting out of here. All the spice workers down there are about to die.
Right.
And Duke Leto springs into action. He does some quick math. 6 men to each ornithopter. And Paul points out, wait a second, that still leaves 3 men short. We need 7 in each.
Dad, you fucked up your like arithmetic.
Right. Duke Leto, though, my guy, doesn't miss a beat.
Yeah.
Looks over his shoulder. We'll find a way.
We'll find a way.
Puts the fucking ornithopter into a nosedive. The sound design in the scene, the way the music goes silent, and we just are in that nosedive with Duke Leto. So good.
I'll say, I think for the first time, this scene, the nosedive and the sound cutting out, the music cutting out, gave me goosebumps.
Yeah.
Gave me chills, utter chills, sitting in the theater for the IMAX preview, and was the scene I wanted to tell you about, Abu, and didn't, because I was like, I need him to see this for himself.
I loved it.
I had to sit on that fucking secret scene for a while, but it's so good. And again, just the sound design and the score of the whole movie is masterful. It's really one of the highlights.
Yeah, it is so good. And just a reminder, Oscar Isaac bringing it in this movie.
Yeah.
Later in this very scene, I also got goosebumps, double goosebumps, I guess, because I already have goosebumps from when he yells, "Damn the spice!" When the workers are like, "We have a full load of spice. What are we going to do, bro?"
Right.
So good. The delivery is so good. The anger is palpable.
Yeah.
And I was shivering. It was just so good. Like Oscar Isaac was, I can't say enough good things about him in this movie. And also, I know we've been recording for a while, but is it getting hotter? Is that just me?
I don't know. Something about that nosedive really did give me the sweats. That's good. Now, this whole scene does have some changes to it from the book. Again, extra drama, extra danger. That Paul is like nearly left behind by his dad. Classic, like, we're good to go from Disneyland. It's like, you're missing one of your children. Still, in a lot of ways, this is very true to the themes and to the book. And this moment for Paul to have the first experience with spice out in the desert, he's falling into this spice trance. And it's really a beautiful scene. We get these great shots of Timothée Chalamet as he's just swept up in this cloud of spice. You know, he's yelled to the people, 7 over there, 7 over there. And in that trance, you know, it's almost comical. Like I heard some people in the theater laugh when Gurney jumps back onto the ornithopter and goes, "Wait, where's Paul?" And Oscar looks back panicked, and you know, we know that the worm is there. Liet's like, "The worm's here." And then it just cuts to Paul kneeling silent next to like sitting on the sand.
Right.
Almost comical how tense that is. And I will say, in these kind of visions that Paul is having, this is going to be the beginning of a bit that I'm going to be continuing throughout this episode called Whisper Check, where there were whispers throughout the movie. And I saw the movie. I kept seeing it in theaters, so I had no idea what some of them were saying. But I looked at these moments with subtitles on just to see if any of it was intelligible and like meant to be understood. And just wanted to point out, right here, we get mostly, quote, "eerie voices murmuring," end quote. So you're welcome. It's very educational to know that these were eerie voices and they were in fact murmuring.
I see.
I know. Really brings some depth to the scene, you know? But we also do get Kwisatz Haderach once, and it's very distorted. And then we get a much clearer Kwisatz Haderach awakes. And that's as that worm is kind of getting to the surface.
Yeah.
Super cool stuff. But yes, sorry. He is sitting, kneeling by the spice crawler, and it cannot be more tense.
Right. No, I appreciated that. Thank you for that whispering check. And we'll circle back later. There's a lot more whispering in this movie.
So much.
Now, as he's kneeling in this trance, Paul says, "I recognize your footsteps, old man."
Right.
And I loved this line. I got so excited, nearly jumped out of my seat, because this line has double meaning here. Maybe even triple meaning.
Quadruple meaning?
Because on one level,
yeah,
this is echoing back to exactly what he said earlier in the sparring scene to Gurney. "I know your footsteps, old man."
Right.
And in this very scene, Gurney is the one that jumps out of the ornithopter, comes up and grabs Paul and takes him back to the ornithopter.
Right.
So, sure, maybe we're just echoing that scene. Maybe it's just another reference to Gurney.
Sure.
But on a second level,
yeah,
there is a huge worm headed their way.
Oh, is there?
And worms, had anyone told you?
Oh, I hadn't noticed. It's subtle. I mean, it's subtle, the approach of the worm. Yeah.
Worms are sometimes referred to as the old man of the desert
Oh.
by the Fremen.
Yeah.
So Paul saying, "I recognize your footsteps, old man," could potentially be Paul speaking to the worm as well.
Yeah.
Because we know later in the book, he rides the worm, he masters the worm. It becomes so integral to him because he joins the Fremen, and the worm is so central. Shai Hulud is so central to Fremen culture.
Oh,
I recognize your footsteps, old man.
love that.
So good.
Yeah.
Brilliant stuff, brilliant double meaning. It's unclear who he's even speaking to in this scene, and I gotta believe that that's intentional.
I love that take.
I want to believe that it's not just a callback to Gurney from earlier.
Right.
There's double meaning here with the worm.
Listen, I'll give you that if you give me my Beatles.
We'll get to the beetle.
We'll get to it. I also will say, this was a number of those shots in the movie where he says, "I recognize your footsteps, old man." And then Gurney is behind him, but we don't see Gurney approach him, right?
Yeah.
There is a disconnect between what we are seeing and being shown as the audience and what is happening in quote unquote real life, right? Similar to when Paul enters the room and hears Gaius Helen whispering, we see him walk forward and then it cuts back to him still standing behind Jessica. There are these shots that almost seem like editing mistakes, but it comes down to the nature of Paul's prescience and the nature of his vision. You know, later on, he sees this vision of Duncan crouched watching him from the rocks after Duncan's already dead. It's so jarring in a really good way.
Yeah.
In a way that I think is perfect in a show don't tell storytelling method.
Yeah. Oh, such a good point. It's masterful storytelling.
I did want to point out one thing. We had a conversation, Abu, you and I, about Kynes.
Yeah.
And about how Kynes is maybe a little bit colder in this film adaptation than in the book. That can be attributed to, we don't get any of, that whole chapter is told from Kynes' perspective. So we get the evolving, wow, these fucking idiots, to, I like this Duke. We see that transition happen.
Yeah.
But if you look at only the words that Kynes says, externally, Kynes is pretty cold. So I didn't really have a problem with that. But because you said it, after I watched the movie again, what really stuck out to me is one particular line. And I actually do want to bring this up as a criticism of the movie and as something that other readers might have been noticed or had been affected by. Kynes says to Duke Leto, "Arrakis has seen men like you come and go." And this is after they've gotten back to the hangar. And can I be clear? This is after Kynes has seen that Duke Leto is not like the other men.
Yes. Damn the spice.
Damn the spice. This is Duke Leto risking everything to save Fremen, to save spice smugglers, to save people, to save humans. That line, this line, "Arrakis has seen men like you come and go," needed to happen earlier. It needed to happen on the ride in. Because in the book, that is that exchange that they have flying to the Harvester.
Yeah.
And it does not reflect accurately because we see Kynes is literally crying in a later scene because of the Atreides family being killed.
Mm-hmm.
We know because of Kynes' actions that Kynes feels differently than saying this line here, and it doesn't really make sense. And it does make later scenes seem more jarring and less expectable. So although I've kind of come back and forth on this particular dynamic, and although I think Sharon Duncan Brewster did everything perfectly, I do think that this line needed to happen earlier and should not have been in this scene because it very much communicates the wrong internal thought process for us. And we just don't get anything else from this scene.
Agreed 100%. I think Sharon Duncan Brewster really brought Liet to life perfectly.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have asked for anything different. But this line, while not inaccurate, this is a sentiment that Liet does have earlier in the book.
Yeah.
And earlier in his or her character arc.
In the chapter.
Earlier in this very chapter, yeah.
Yeah. Like 20 minutes ago, yeah. But now, no.
Exactly. Not an inaccurate line, just a misplaced line. That's right. A really good note. I'm glad you caught that and called that out. I agree 100%.
Yeah.
In the following scene, we are with Paul and Dr. Yui and Jessica, and Paul is being tested after this whole scary spice trance situation out in the desert.
Right.
And Dr. Yui declares that Paul is sensitive to the spice that is so prevalent here on Arrakis and particularly out in the desert. And that
Right.
is basically a line that's included to tell the viewer that spice is the catalyst that activates his powers, or one of the catalysts that activates his deeper abilities.
Yeah.
Then after a quick checkup, Dr. Yui declares that otherwise Paul is okay, and he leaves the room. Jessica asks Paul about those visions, and we get flashes of what those visions were. There's a shot of him making out with Chani. It's very dramatic. It's very slow-mo. My one question is, would those nose plugs get in the way? I feel like I'd bump nose plugs, but I digress.
You work with it.
You work around it. You tilt your head a bit more, I think.
Right.
We also see this horrific shot of Chani stabbing him, a bloody knife, and Chani stabbing him to death, which is just another clue about the inaccuracies of Paul's prescient abilities. We know that that doesn't happen in this movie. Chani doesn't stab him to death. So the fact that he sees it in one of his visions, that's horrifying.
I love that we see that because in the book, we're told Paul sees all these different ways that he could die by knife. He's just like, God, I'm getting fucking killed by knives all the time on Dune. To know that there was a chance, a future, in which Chani fucking kills him. God, that must add so much electricity to the bedroom. Like, that's just got to be such a thrill.
I did not think that's where you were going.
I had you in the first half. Now, the other side of that is I do think that this movie does a great job with these kind of visions of Jameis as a friend, Chani as a killer. That shift that we know doesn't end up being that way. But all the more confusing for Paul, because then when he sees her, he's not in the book. He's like, I've seen you. What's up, girl? I love you. In the movie, it kind of makes sense that he'd be like, oh,
hello.
you. Okay, are we feeling killy or are we feeling...
I've seen two versions of you. What's the vibe?
What's the vibe, girl? You feeling stabby today? And like in a good way or a bad way? Because I might be able to make it work.
Oh, man. That's so funny. That's a good point. It adds some nuance to their first introduction later in the movie. That's a great point.
And explains that they're not super, like that he wouldn't make more of a move. Because in the book, he's kind of smooth almost, and unintentionally at times, hey, can you carry my water ring? She's like, oh my God, like blushing.
Yeah.
In the movie, he stops himself from saying things. He's very hesitant to do anything. Makes sense if you've been seeing dreams of her just gutting you like a fish and then her hands covered in your blood. Yeah, he's going to be a little bit hesitant.
That's true. That's true. And, folks, as we all know, if your lover is not willing to stab you in the throes of lovemaking, do they really love you? Go ask them this very moment. Would they stab you? We also, in addition to these shots of Chani, see an absolutely gorgeous, stunning shot. We saw it in the trailers as well, of Jessica as the Fremen's Reverend Mother, which we know she will become later.
Right.
With these tattoos all over her face and cradling who we know will be Alia Atreides.
Alia! She's in the movie, technically.
Technically, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is also the moment where Paul reveals that, yeah, Mom, I've seen this vision. I know you're pregnant.
Right.
And obviously Jessica is floored by this. She's so early. No one should be able to know. And this is just proof to her that something is happening with Paul and these powers are not to be messed with.
Right. Also, regarding all of those visions, I just wanted to highlight, it really shows us how fucking confusing it must be to be Paul with a waking vision, right? My eyes were wide open, but I was seeing something else entirely, right? He saw himself get stabbed, but that was him being stabbed, so much so that he fell to his knees. And it really drives home something that I never got from the books, honestly, just because of, I think, the way that I process reading. I never quite understood how lost in a vision he could be. We can read descriptions of him clinging to Chani in the darkness during the spice orgy, that first scene in the book. We can read the scene him saying, stay with me, as he's kind of holding her, hoping to ground himself in reality, but knowing that he's going to get lost to these visions. But the idea of him powerless, defenseless, just sitting there next to the spice harvester,
yeah,
completely succumbing to that vision, is really scary and powerful and has got to be unnerving for a young guy. Really incredible stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so the movie then jumps to another planet that we have yet to visit.
Yeah.
Seleucus Secundus.
Yeah.
It's very wet, and there are legions of Sardaukar.
And they've got this dope throat-singing DJ who's just dropping some sick beats.
Yeah.
And all the troops are like, God, this guy's great. I wonder if he'll do my birthday party. Like, so good.
My kid's bar mitzvah is next week. I wonder if I can book this guy.
This cover of Freebird is insane, but I love it.
Yeah. It's a very short scene, and I'm so curious to know if there's other parts of Seleucus Secundus that were cut, because it's such a short scene that it makes me think all the effort of getting the set together and filming it is almost not even worth it.
Right.
I digress. In this scene, basically, Piter talks to the Sardaukar commander and reaffirms that, hey, we're going to do this thing. We're going to attack the Atreides.
Right.
We need 3 legions of your Sardaukar to join us. We need the Emperor's help in this.
Right.
And the Sardaukar commander is like, what are you guys talking about? The Harkonnens outnumber the Atreides. You guys should be able to fight this on your own. Why do you need us to hold your hand during this? And here's when Piter reveals and we learn that the Atreides soldiers are actually some of the best fighters in the galaxy because they've been trained by 2 of the best warriors in the galaxy, Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck.
Yeah.
And so no matter how much of a numbers advantage the Harkonnens might have, to assure victory in this, because it's a big gamble that the Baron is taking here, to assure victory, they need the Sardaukar's help. And the commander agrees because he's also been told to agree. The Emperor's in on this plan too.
Right.
So
I do wish this was something that was reflected, and we'll talk about the Arrakeen attack when it comes up, but we basically just see House Atreides troops floored by Sardaukar.
Yeah.
And they need to be scary. Like, the Sardaukar need to be intimidating. But it would be cool to see, one of these foot soldiers, who are apparently one of the strongest fighting forces in the galaxy, actually taking out 2 or 3 people, and then maybe, coming one-on-one with a Sardaukar and dying.
Yeah.
And am I asking for additional scenes in a 3-hour movie? Oops. Yes. Accidentally, I am. But I think that's also the nature of all of this. Is
right.
They say this because we need to know it, and we need to know Harkonnen soldiers are lower than Atreides, are lower than Sardaukar, are lower than Duncan definitely fucks Idaho, and Gurney definitely fucks Halleck. But there is still just an opportunity, I guess, in future installments to show some of what Piter is talking about here. Yeah.
I agree fully. I wish we had seen more of that fighting ability on display.
Now, the next scene takes us to Leto and Jessica, who are discussing basically Paul and the changes that are coming over this young Messiah.
Right.
This young chosen one. Neo from the Matrix has been acting a lot different since he became Neo from the Matrix.
Right. His voice is getting deeper. He's suddenly interested in girls.
He started a motorcycle company. It's, sorry, that's just Keanu Reeves. Sorry, I get them confused. So this is one of the most incredible little moments.
Yeah.
Where, again, specific to the movie, not in the book, Leto says to Jessica, yo, if something happens to me, will you protect Paul? And Jessica's like, obviously. And this is the thing. We only saw that clip of her going, with my life, right? Yes. We only saw that. What we didn't see is his follow-up point, which is the heartbreaking, heart-wrenching moment that really makes this scene next level and really takes it to another level, which is the quote, I'm not asking his mother. I'm asking the Bene Gesserit, end quote.
Oh.
Incredible.
Wow.
Incredible. And he has that whole little monologue, I always trusted you. I put my trust in you, complete trust, even when you walked in shadows. You did shady shit sometimes.
Right.
You let that dude's blood once. You killed that kid. I don't know. You do crazy shit sometimes. Always trusted you, Jessica. But I need you to right now promise to me that you'll protect him as a Bene Gesserit. And she doesn't.
No.
She dodges the question. And I can't tell if this is her actually dodging the question because she doesn't want to answer it, or if it's literally just that she gets to the heart of the matter, which is, this isn't like you. Like, what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a little hard to say, but God.
Yeah, it's a little tough to read that interaction because, yeah, on one level, it is like a politician on a debate stage level fucking pivot
Right.
from answering that question, right? Really flipping it around on Leto. No, but what's wrong with you, though?
Right. What about when you also killed that? No, it's like, no.
Right. But at the same time, you are also correct that maybe she's just cutting through the bullshit and getting to the heart of it.
Right.
What's wrong, Leto? What's got you so down? So,
like, you've always trusted me, and I know you still trust me, but you're asking for affirmation of a different type. Let me just give you that affirmation, whatever it is, because I'm here for you.
yeah.
And she knows him, and she loves him deeply, and
Right.
she actually isn't, if you're looking at the book. Like, of course she's going to fucking protect Paul. As a Bene Gesserit, almost as much as Jessica, because Paul is everything to the Bene Gesserits as well.
Right.
But again, she cuts to the heart of the matter, and we get this absolutely despondent, tired delivery, which is just so good. I thought we'd have more time.
Ooh.
Also, on a rewatch earlier, Thufir just says, all we need is time. And then you think about this line and you go, oh shit, this is so sad. Yeah.
Yeah. He's so defeated here. And it's a different Leto than the one we saw at the staff meeting or the one that we saw out in the desert, saving all those people's lives.
Right.
This is the true Duke Leto Atreides, who's tired. He's vulnerable here.
He wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah. He just wanted to retire, man. He just wanted to be a pilot. So later that night, we are still with Jessica and Leto. The two are now much more affectionate. They're getting ready for bed. And Leto, instead of taking his sleeping pills, decides to lay in Jessica's lap. She rubs his head. And he says, oh, this is heartbreaking. He says a gut-wrenching quote, I should have married you.
Yeah.
And no explanation. I kind of appreciated that the movie didn't really give an explanation to what that means.
Yeah.
In the book, we know, obviously, it's a political reason. She's his concubine, but he loves her. They've been together for 16 years, yada, yada.
Right.
We don't really get that depth here, but I think from Leto's delivery, we understand. We understand his regret and not taking that step.
Right.
Even if we don't understand the political meaning behind it.
Yeah, I have seen some people online confused about that. This idea of like, wait, she's not his wife?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's politics. If you are someone who watched the movie, didn't read the book, and don't really know, it is because Leto is single, he can be potentially married to another great house. It's a political thing. And that's a huge underlying thing in Dune. So all the more so for him to go, God, I'm so fucking tired of all the bullshit. I want to retire. I want to be a pilot. And as a pilot, I could marry you. I should have just married you.
Yeah.
So sweet. Also, by my count, the last thing he says to her before
oh my God.
he dies. And that really is part of what like drew me to straight up crying in the theater when she's mourning the loss of her love. That idea of like, God, a beautiful, touching moment that they were able to share, but so fucking heartbreaking.
Yeah. And what's even more heartbreaking is our boy's about to get captured and die.
Yeah.
The best part of this movie. Oscar, no.
Right.
So, like I mentioned earlier, the traitor subplot from the book is pretty much axed. So, in this scene here, when Duke Leto wakes up, investigates, finds a dying Shout-Out Mapes out in the courtyard, and then the betrayal from Yui happens. For me, I was like, okay, well, I knew that was coming. I understand the subtext of it, but I imagine for the average moviegoer who doesn't know, this kind of comes out of left field.
Right.
And even for me, knowing that it was going to happen, it still came out of left field. I was like, oh, wow, okay, so they're really committing to the Yui thing, but they never set it up. I honestly, while watching the movie, I was like, okay, there's no traitor stuff happening here. Are they going to change up how Duke Leto dies and maybe not include the traitor stuff? But they do. The rest of it is very much how the book plays out. Yui shows up here, hits Duke Leto with a paralyzing dart, and we see it sort of fight against the shield that Leto has activated in this scene and finally break through and hit him, and then he falls to the floor.
Right.
And Yui comes up and does the whole tooth thing, explains his plan with the tooth, and tells Duke Leto that he has this opportunity to take down his arch nemesis, to take down the Baron. All he has to do is bite down on the tooth.
I like the added line that they are taking Juana apart like a doll. Like, that's just such a visceral, horrible thing.
Yeah.
That you can really get in that one sentence why someone would go to any lengths to make that stop. So on a second watch, I feel a little differently about this. You see the 3 guards taken down. You see the power generators come down and a shadowy figure and the lights turn off. And you see this figure once or twice.
Yeah.
And he only comes into focus once Leto is shot, right? And moments before, he's going room to room giving the sleeping pills. You know, he comes in to Paul Atreides' room and goes, "Here's your pill, young master." And Paul's like, "Thanks, Huey." And he's like, "Have a good night." And he kind of pauses on the threshold as he leaves. And it's not a big moment. It's not hyperbole. It's not overdone. But there is a slight hesitation there that on a rewatch, I'm like, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Again, would it be more satisfying if we had time to question and really think about, oh, there is a traitor. I wonder who it is. I wonder who it is. It would be so much more satisfying. But the way that it played out, it's fine. What needed to happen is what happened.
Yeah.
So we got there. And as a small detail, the personal shields that we know are Holtzman shields and they reflect most projectiles.
Right.
Good reminder that it is said in the Dune Encyclopedia and in Dune that some projectiles can penetrate personal shields because they are shot and they have a slow enough speed, right? Their velocity is low enough that they can get through the shields.
Yeah.
It looks like the stunner guns or the stunner darts in this scene are drills almost, where they maybe like latch onto the shield and then slowly go through it. And all the more terrifying to think about, you know that you've been shot in the back with something and you have a couple of seconds to panic and freak out before it hits you. It's just terrifying.
Yeah.
It's really scary. Although later Duncan shows how you can get around that with fucking anime skills. But anyway, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
All of that to say, some really good stuff here. And you're right. It's not quite as satisfying as it could have been had we maybe more time to wonder about Yui.
Right. Okay, let's wrap up Act 2 with a bang.
Right.
A literal bang. Many bangs,
bangs,
actually. Because the attack on Arrakis begins, and Gurney, who's asleep in his bunk, is awakened by his soldiers. The Harkonnens have arrived, and they're making their assault. I did see online somewhere that someone did a freeze frame of that shot where Gurney wakes up.
He has a balisette.
And there's a balisette.
There's a balisette.
It's like totally obscured in the darkness. You can only see like part of it.
You see the frets.
Yeah.
Like the neck of the balisette. Yeah. I saw that too. I was going to bring it up. It's not in our script.
I forgot to put it in our script, but I got to shout out the internet here for spotting that tiny, tiny detail.
Yeah.
Good to see Gurney's balisette make an appearance in the movie.
Yeah.
But the assault has begun on Arrakis, and it is epic in scale. I think epic is like really the only word that comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
The attacks on the ships, seeing how they blow up, how the bombs and projectiles kind of come down, slowly make their way through the shield, and then explode. And then the explosion is self-contained within the shield. Very cool visuals.
So good.
Yeah.
Holy shit. I want to go frame by frame on those effects, because really to see all of that fire and destruction captured within the shape of the ship for a second before then the shields crumble, it's visually so interesting and so beautiful. Yeah.
Definitely. And Gurney rallies the troops, rallies the Atreides, follow me, charges into battle, and it's on. The fight for survival begins. The Harkonnens descend upon Arrakeen Palace. I will say, I mentioned earlier that the choreography between Gurney and Paul in that training sparring scene was really good. I think here it wasn't.
Right.
I think that battle on the stairway, I guess, of Arrakeen Palace was kind of a blurry mess of just bodies and shields and really quick, shaky cuts, camera cuts.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it earlier, but once the Sardaukar arrived, they just kind of wipe the floor with everyone.
Right.
And it's almost comical. I wish we had seen more Atreides soldiers putting up a fight, and I wish we had seen some better fight choreography. It's just a bunch of bodies crashing into each other, and then the Sardaukar arrive and just wipe everyone. So, I don't know. again, who am I to critique Denis, one of the masters of his craft? But it seems to me that large scale epic battle scenes and action sequences are maybe not really his thing.
Maybe, but also like the vision that Chani provides to Paul when he's in the tent and he sees the Fremen Fedaykin like attacking.
Yeah.
That sequence with the like rolls and the cuts and like the multiple dodges and the worms exploding in the background and like rewatching that little fight sequence, I'm like, this is fucking incredible.
Yeah.
Like, this is so cool.
That's a great point.
Where was all of this?
Right.
Like, where was all of this in the attack on Arrakeen, which just from like the inside of the industry a little bit, just reads to me as there was some sort of limitation.
Yeah.
Whether it was time or budgeting or maybe the locale and like the set sizes.
Or even cut scenes. Like maybe there is a longer cut of the battle somewhere out there and someone decided, this is dragging. We need to cut some stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like maybe there is more here that makes this battle more cohesive and easy to follow. But as it's presented in the final cut of the film.
As it is, yeah.
It's a bit messy. It's hard to follow. And frankly, it happens at night. So like everything is so dark.
Yeah.
That at points I was just like, who's Harkonnen and who's Atreides? Like, what's happening?
Nighttime battles are famously like really hard to get right, but this one is not.
Yeah.
Not an example of getting it perfect. Yeah.
Right. So as epic as the scale was and as incredible as some of the visuals were with the bombs going off and the flames erupting around the palace, I think the actual choreography of the fight and how it played out could have been done a little bit better.
Totally.
So that's a small critique. Did it make or break the film? No, absolutely not. Like it was intense. It was good. The music was incredible. And we did get to see Duncan escape.
Yeah.
So whereas the larger battle was maybe a bit lackluster, Duncan's escape maybe made up for that because it was epic.
Dude, it was epic, but also I love Duncan running through the palace in just his like nightshirt and a couple of knives, like fighting fully armored Sardaukar and just one at a time fucking killing them.
Yes.
On his way to, he's like, that's not even what he's here for. He's like, no, okay, get out of the way, fucking legendary warrior, whatever. Like, I'm looking for Paul. And so good. I love his fight choreography is so good throughout the movie.
I agree.
And super fun. And then, you're right, his escape from Arrakeen in the ornithopter is fucking incredible. He straight up Grand Theft Autos an ornithopter.
Yes.
To be clear, he looks and he sees 8 Harkonnen soldiers. And he goes, I'm going to kill those 3. Kills those 3. Kills one more. By my count, that's 3 or maybe 4 others. And they're like, you know what? Fuck it. Take it. Take the ornithopter.
I do not get paid enough for this.
I am clocking out. You know what? I think it's time for a 15-minute break. So I'm going to take that. And if I get back and this ship's gone.
Who knows what happened to it? Yeah.
Weird. What a mystery. Right. It's chaotic tonight. And then he hops into the ornithopter, takes off. First thing he does, fucking rockets some like grounded Sardaukar ships, which is like incredible.
Yeah.
And then the ship gets hit, right? And I loved this little detail. Like a projectile hits his ornithopter. It's shielded, so it just kind of pushes the ship. And then they start shooting lasers at him. This giant, insane, massive laser beam is like tracking him through this incredible pursuit through the city. And I really do need to like go frame by frame and enjoy the like decoration of the city and like the little sets because it just passes so quickly. But I do want to point out, obviously book readers are like, wait a second, laser guns and shields don't classically mix very well.
Yeah.
This is a pretty bold move on the part of the Harkonnens, shooting laser guns at a shielded ornithopter. But 2 possibilities, right? Either the movie is saying, you know what, the Holtzman shield laser gun equals nuclear explosion equation, maybe not super important for the movie, we're just going to drop it. Or, also possible, considering they like blanket bombed the city not a minute later, it's possible they're like, you know what, bonus nuclear explosion in the middle of the city?
Yeah.
Not a bad thing. Like, let's go for it. Let's try it out. I don't know. Not really sure how I feel about it, but cool all around.
Right. There were a couple of shield inconsistencies in this film. I saw some folks online pointing out how they make such a big deal of the fact that the shields, you got to attack slow to get through the shields. But then our boy Duncan is out here just like decking Sardaukar left and right as hard as he can. And the shields like seemingly don't work at that point. So I think it's a hard balance to figure out how do we make the action intense and fast and visceral, but also follow the laws of the Holtzman shield, which are kind of not super exciting to see on screen.
My headcanon is that part of what makes Duncan Idaho such an incredibly effective fighter is that he approaches the point of the shield very, very quickly and then imperceptibly slows down and delivers the killing blow. Because again, what does it mean to be a good fighter?
Yeah, totally.
Other than like, I guess being a good grappler, like how would you be a good sword fighter if you, so I don't know. Part of me is like, there's that. The other possibility is, because we don't actually know how Holtzman shields deal with force, distributing force. It's possible Duncan's swinging with like an 80-pound swing.
He's just punching so hard.
Such that it's like, okay, did he cut me? No. Did he crush my rib cage with the force of his meaty arm? You know what? He did. So I'm just going to take this. I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to lay here and be dead because
it's so anime.
That's Duncan motherfucking Idaho.
That's a great point. This is why I'm such an ardent believer that Dune must be adapted to anime.
Oh, I mean, we have Star Wars visions. Come on.
Imagine those shield sword fights in like Haikyuu style anime. Holy fucking shit.
Anyway. And that's Act 2.
Oh my God.
Look at that. Easy peasy. We've only been recording for 3 hours.
3 hours and 15 minutes. Let's fucking go.
Let's go. It's everything we wanted it to be. We've been recording longer than the movie Dune at this point.
Yes, we have. Alrighty. So obviously we need a breather. You probably need a breather at this point too. So we are going to take one more short break. And when we come back, we will wrap up our deep dive discussion of this film and tackle Act 3, when Paul and Jessica make that escape out into the desert. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break as much as we did. We are now in the desert. It's official. We've made it to the sands of Arrakis. Oh, boy.
Boy.
What a chunk of the movie.
Yeah, this transition to the desert is so, I would say nonstop, I guess. Like, the movie is relatively slow in the first half, and then the attack on Arrakeen happens, and then we're just going full throttle.
Yeah. And getting specific, let's talk about this first scene. We have Paul and Jessica. They awaken in the Harkonnen ornithopter. This is such an interesting scene, and it really, for me, it was fun to see, again, Paul trying to use the voice and to, I don't know, let's talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. So we join Paul and Jessica. They have obviously been captured by the Harkonnens after this attack. And just like the Baron said, just like he promised Piter after that conversation with Moheim in the Cone of Silence, he won't be responsible for killing Paul and Jessica, but the desert will. And that's the plan. The Harkonnen guards here have been ordered to take Paul and Jessica out into the desert and then drop them off there. And they will inevitably die because, as we know, you don't survive in the desert unless you know the Fremen ways and have a still suit and are able to dodge Shai Hulud himself.
Right. That old man.
Which, turns out Paul and Jessica managed to do all of those things thanks a little bit to Yui's help.
Right.
He stashes a Frem kit and a note in this ornithopter, and Paul and Jessica, with some fancy use of the voice, are able to escape from these Harkonnen guards. And I particularly liked the little fake out to the audience where I, as a book reader, was like, okay, Paul's about to use the voice effectively for the first time. I'm excited to see that.
Yeah.
And then Paul does use it, and he's like, untie my mother. And the guard just looks at him, comes over and slaps him in the face.
Shut up.
I love that little fake out, like playing with audience expectations there.
I think that might only be funny to people who read the book.
Yeah,
now that I
yeah,
think about
totally.
it. Like, it's kind of what happened at breakfast, but as a book reader, you know, oh, this is when Paul's really starting to tap into it. But
Yeah.
it's really funny that, shut up. It's like, damn. All right. He's still learning. Cool.
Right.
I did want to point out, this scene is mostly accurate to the book, right? Like,
Yeah,
the
definitely.
horniness of the Harkonnen guards, Paul being protective, and that sort of spurning his maybe dangerous decision. We do miss this one little detail, this tiny little detail, where Paul does his kind of signature leg sweep in the movie. But in the book, he's, as the guard is falling, he kicks him in the fucking heart, basically. Like, kicks him under the ribs and is like, crushes one of the main arteries in his heart.
Yeah.
And the guy dies. Now, I almost thought that, looking back on it, that this was a mistake on Frank Herbert's part, because famously later on, when Stilgar's asking Jessica, yo, is he fucking playing with Jameis? Or like, what's happening? Why is he so hesitant to end the fight? And I remember Jessica saying he's never killed someone before.
Right.
And of course, well, there's the guy whose fucking heart he exploded. So I checked it, and in the book, the line is, he's never killed a man with a naked blade. So this is the first time, yeah, it's a little bit more specific, right? That being said, in the movie, Jessica does in fact say he's never killed a man, which once you've made that change, which I think is a good change, to be clear. Like, I love that Paul kicks the dude in the heart and kills him in the book. Like, that's just so badass, and it's very main character of him. But I think for emotional resonance, making Jameis his first ever kill, period, is so much more impactful and is so much more...
Agreed.
Having him casually kill a couple of Harkonnen guys, like, that's fine, but I do like making Jameis more significant in Paul's life, because he's supposed to be significant. I mean, that's a big part of Jameis's role.
Yeah, I agree. As much as I would have loved to see Timothée Chalamet drop kick some dude in the chest and explode his heart, as anime as that is, I agree fully with your take on that. It's a good change. It's a small change. It's not overly influential in the story, but it is important that Paul's first kill is Jameis. And considering the fact that Jameis plays a much larger role in this movie than he does in the book, it feels like a very intentional change here.
Right. The next scene we get, tragically and horribly, but very well done, is Leto's death scene. And granted,
yes,
oh God, it's heartbreaking. It's also, these next few shots are kind of interspersed. We're seeing Paul and Jessica's story as well as Leto's story in kind of parallel.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's start by talking about naked Oscar Isaac.
Yeah. If we can just sort of set aside the next 45 minutes, I have some thoughts.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Most of them are, why am I sweating? It is 40 degrees in New York today.
Yeah. It's cold. I'm still sweating. Good Lord.
Profusely.
Oscar for Oscar, right? Hashtag Oscar for Oscar.
Hashtag Oscar for Oscar.
Looking great.
He's looking great. He's spitting great. If this is not the most sexualized Oscar Isaac we've ever gotten on the big screen, I don't know what is, folks. If he doesn't get a goddamn Oscar for this, I quit.
I will say, also just great physical acting from him, legitimately.
Yeah.
There's something so unsettling about the way that he's slumped in the chair. Like he was really just dropped there and he can't move, and it looks so uncomfortable. And it really, as much as I was like, oh my God, he's naked, I was also like, this is horrible. And this could go so dark. Like this could get so bad. And that's all communicated just in the first couple of seconds from the camera angles, from the way that we're sort of slowly revealed his predicament and his vulnerability. It also, on rewatching the movie, really strikes me how throughout the movie, he's always so poised and so elegant, always dressed in this complex armor or this incredible formal attire. So to see him suddenly naked is just so shocking and viscerally. That's not in the book. In the book, he's just there And
It's ambiguous in the book. His nakedness is up for debate in the book.
I mean, I personally assumed he was naked every time they didn't say he was wearing clothes explicitly. And I was like, I too, like Kynes, like this Duke. But yeah, you're right. You're right. There's some ambiguity there.
Yeah. The scene, though, I will say, is fairly accurate to how things play out in the book. There are a couple of small changes that we do want to highlight, though. And we've talked about so far in this discussion how Piter is getting shortchanged in this film quite a bit.
Yeah.
And here is yet another example. In this scene in the book, Piter is the one that stabs Yui in the back and is the one that ultimately brings about the death of Dr. Yui. That is changed in this film. The Baron actually lifts Yui up and slashes his throat.
Yeah. Now, this does a couple of things. On one hand, I can't help but think about the reason Yui gave Duke Leto the tooth in the first place is because he knew kind of intuitively that he would be killed before the Baron would get close to him and that the Baron just wouldn't put him in that position. So in a certain sense, this kind of like invalidates Yui's book reasoning for why even use the tooth. Like just install it on yourself, dude. If you know you're going to probably die.
Yeah, Yui was definitely close enough to the Baron's face. The Baron's unshielded face, mind you.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't activate the shield until later.
Yeah. No kidding.
He should have had a backup tooth, put one in his mouth too.
Every tooth. Just fill your mouth with those teeth, guy. You can't eat any solid foods for a couple of weeks, but it's fine. Or imagine eating popcorn and you accidentally get a kernel.
Sometimes eating popcorn does feel like death, though. So I get it.
You accidentally bite down hard and then everyone in the room is dead. So there is that side of this that kind of it didn't really bother me because, again, I understand we got to keep the book moving. We got to keep the movie moving. But the other side of this, which I actually really appreciate, is Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. The fact that he single-handedly, first of all, floats over, which is scary.
Ooh, so good. Yeah.
Little sequence is terrifying. He's just getting closer and closer to the camera. But he picks him up with his one hand. And I checked this. Not only does he slash Yui's throat, he removes his head from his body.
Oh my God.
Just as a indication of someone's monstrous strength. He's got power and he's vicious. As our friend Gurney Halleck says, they're brutal.
Right. It definitely adds to the Baron's character here. So we're sacrificing a little Piter action and a little more characterization for Piter just to reinforce the idea that the Baron is a deadly rival to the Atreides, someone to be feared. So I did like that aspect of it. Yeah.
Overall, just incredible scene. And of course, this leads to not the Baron dying, although he gets stuck in the room, which is, again, a change from the book.
Yeah.
We get some fucking iconic physical acting from these Among Us character cleanup crew guys.
Really interesting that they figured out an Among Us collab. Good on them.
Yeah.
You got to reach the Gen Z audience.
The Dune TikToks are going to be out of control. But the two guys who come in to clean up the gas in the room, who then hear the kind of coughing, sputtering from the corner, both of them look in this almost comical way, like the slow turn and look, and then just the utter flinch at, is that the fucking Baron? It's so funny, but it, again, didn't even break the scene for me. I was like, this is great. I love this so much.
Yeah, and thus we confirm that the Baron survived this attack. Poor Piter didn't. We saw him literally inhale the gas as the doors closed in on him. But the Baron floated up, he was shielded, and just barely survived the attack.
Right.
Now, while this scene was playing out, as you said, it's also intercut with the scene of Paul and Jessica in the tent. And that's obviously intentional because as we, the viewer, watch Duke Leto die, Paul and Jessica realize that they have lost the man that they both love so much, a father and a partner.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. And Rebecca Ferguson's acting in this whole sequence is really top tier stuff.
Yeah.
Now, a little bit later when we rejoin them in the tent, we get there's spice in the tent. And sure enough, Paul is having what looks like almost an allergic reaction. Joke's on you, idiot. He's like, I'm not allergic to the spice. Turns out you have a spice allergy. Stupid.
Right. He forgot his Claritin Clear in his room. So the allergic reaction is obviously Paul's powers awakening in this scene. This is a very pivotal scene in the book. This is the moment where the combination of stress, losing his father, and all the intake of spice now that they're in the deep desert triggers what is the strongest visions Paul has to date.
Yeah.
And the movie makes that clear by showing us these visions in some of the clearest ways. It's not blurry. Doesn't have that flashy color grading to it. It is a very clear, stark vision.
Right.
Of a handful of scenes. And effectively what we see is the looming jihad, this holy war. Paul even says here, as this vision overcomes him, Timothée Chalamet doing some incredible acting. He screams, "A war in my name! Everyone's shouting my name!" And kind of curls up into a ball in the corner of this tent, and he's freaking out. He's seeing these visions, this incredible vision of Chani standing next to Paul, overlooking this bloody horde of Fremen, Atreides banners blowing in the wind.
Right.
He's coming to realize that this bloodshed in his name across the entire galaxy is going to happen in the future. He is seeing the clearest vision of it yet, and it's terrific.
Yeah. He has that line, he says, this is the future, like this is what's going to happen. And it really shows us that he is becoming cognizant of it as prescience and not just, I've been having dreams of a girl in Arrakis and it, maybe it's an omen. No, he's like, this is the fucking future. And how horrible is that?
Yeah.
It's so powerful. He has that little broken, somebody please help me, which is just heartbreaking as he's being swept away, which then, of course, leads us. You're right. He's curled up in the corner and his mother's like, you know who you are. Like, I can tell you're afraid, but like, come on, you're Paul Atreides, you're Leto's son, like all this stuff. And we get the most impactful use of the voice in the movie.
Yes.
And one of the most heartbreaking moments where Paul screams at her, quote, "Get off me. You did this to me. You Bene Gesserit made me a freak."
Oh my gosh. The way the voice activates at "get off me."
Yeah.
It's not a request. It's not lashing out. It is a fucking command. And it is a command that Jessica is unable to resist. She instantly pulls away. It's so powerful.
And then the hurt on her face, as
Yeah.
soon as she's like, really struck me that this is all she has. All she has left is Paul. House Atreides is gone. Leto is gone. All she has is Paul. And to be just slapped with that much power is like,
right.
It's got, in this scene in the movie, again, Rebecca just sells it. The look on Jessica's face is heartbreaking as she sort of tries to muster her emotions and kind of regain control and composure. And of course, after he finishes saying that, she returns to him, kind of holds him, and he has, again, one of the most heartbreaking lines in the movie, "My father is dead," which is just like, oh, God.
And then he too finally breaks down, it all washes over him now that the visions have passed. It's just talking about it, I'm getting a little emotional. It's a very powerful scene in the movie and done so, so well. So then we cut to a scene, very short scene, of Duncan in that escaped ornithopter landing on a cliffside, walking out, and basically confronting Liet Kynes, who is standing overlooking a burning Arrakeen with Harkonnen ships floating above. And he basically demands / asks aggressively, "Hey, will you stand in front of the Landsraad, in front of the governing body of the great houses, and tell them how the best of them was wiped out,
right.
How the Emperor turned on them? Will you reveal what happened here on Arrakis?" And Kynes, in response to Duncan, turns to him and says, "I can't. I've been ordered to say and see nothing."
Again, Sharon Duncan Brewster is bringing so much to this scene, and her eyes begin to water up. Like she begins to tear up as she delivers that line, "See nothing, say nothing." And after he says his next line, which is like, "We were sent here to die," she's actually shedding tears in that next cut to her. And the idea of Liet Kynes crying, like giving water to the dead.
Giving water, right. She's a Fremen.
That idea is again, missing from the book. Like, Liet was sympathetic to Paul in the book, but was generally a little bit like, I like the Duke, but whatever. If he dies, he dies. I'm a Fremen. The idea of being so moved by the loss of this honorable man, in a lot of ways, I think this is not only very powerful emotionally, I think it does set up what could be seen as like a sudden shift where Kynes is suddenly helping them. Well, here is the emotional impact of seeing this awful part that she had to play in the trap.
And she clearly decides to help Duncan, because in the very next scene, Duncan and Liet link up with Paul and Jessica in the desert and pick them up and basically bring them to this abandoned ecological testing station, which in my mind, when I read the book, was like a very small thing, a very small room.
Little caves and
it's
tight.
Enormous in the movie.
We're in this like massive ecological testing station. I guess actually, the room that Duncan finds where it's like all of the plants, the almost like weirding room where there's just all the little the little test things and little experiments. That is kind of what I pictured. But you're right, that like main area that's just cavernous, this massive tubular room, really epic looking,
Yeah. And while they're walking through this room and basically going to the little side office or whatever, Liet is explaining to Paul and Jessica that this ecological testing station was part of an original plan for Arrakis to make it more hospitable, to tame the desert and make this desert planet something that could be potentially colonized and could support human life. And that's when the discovery of spice in the desert was made, and everyone decided, wait, we can't get rid of the desert because clearly desert equals spice, and spice equals lots of money and the ability to travel through space. So those original plans were abandoned.
Right.
Now, it's a little unclear if this has anything to do with Pardo Kynes, because as we know in the book, it's Liet's father, Pardo, who comes as the Imperial planetologist to Arrakis and has this plan to make it more hospitable, to change Arrakis into a lush green world. And Pardo is the person that sort of convinces / tricks the Fremen into believing and buying into his plan. I think that has probably been simplified here by Liet's explanation, and that whole Pardo plotline has probably been streamlined. And personally, I don't mind the simplification too much. As much as I love Pardo and everything that he does with the Fremen and the history of his dream of a green Arrakis, I think this streamlining of it gets the same idea across, basically, but doesn't get into all the messy Pardo history.
I do hope that they kind of find a way, in the same way that Gurney Halleck says that Thufir Hawat line about back to the door, don't stand with your back to the door. And as much as we're about to see Jameis quoting to Paul something that Gaius Helen Mohiam said to him, as I hope that they take some of Pardo's philosophical musings, some of the things that he says in those like visions as Liet is dying in the book. I hope that those make it into the movie, because that idea of like government and religion riding in the same cart and oh my God, that line, we get that incredible quote from him, which is still one of my favorite quotes and I think one of the most important thematic quotes in all of Dune, which is that quote, "No more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero," end quote.
Yeah.
Which,
God.
Thesis statement for all of Dune. It's like, but so I do hope that Villeneuve does the same thing that he did with the other characters and their other lines, because, Pardo is not a big deal, but some of what Pardo says is clearly coming from close to the core of Dune.
Yeah. But if you've read the comic book, his hair is kind of a big deal, though. So he's got a great hair care routine.
I don't know if that's canon, but I'll believe it.
Now, as Liette and Paul and Jessica are having a conversation in the private room, the Fremen escort decide to make some coffee.
Yeah.
Using their spit. I'll pass. I don't do well with caffeine anyway, so you guys have the coffee, enjoy.
You don't go to that barista in Williamsburg who does that? It's like very artisanal. Every day tastes different based on what he had for breakfast.
Jesus. God, no amount of CBD he puts in that coffee can hide the musk of his breakfast.
Well, luckily, his breakfast is just pure CBD. He's very committed to his coffee store.
Now, in the private room, Paul makes an iconically bold pitch to Liette, basically saying, hey, what if I tried to be emperor?
Right, yo,
and
catch this plan.
Right.
Me, Golden Lion Throne. What do you think?
You win or you win, Liette.
Liette's like, and Liette in the movie is like, you're a fucking child in the desert, my guy. He's like, right. But also, what if I was
just a
emperor?
Technicality.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't blame Liette in this scene for being just totally incredulous at first.
Right.
But Paul, being the astute young man that he is,
astute as fuck,
pulls out the Lisan al-Gaib.
Right.
He brings up the legend, and as we know, Liette is really tempted to believe in this legend. Paul is doing all the right things, pushing all the right buttons. And then he also mentions some personal things about Liette's life that no one would know unless you were close to Liette or knew her in a way that Paul simply doesn't here. They've talked like 2 times.
Yeah, right.
So Paul's doing a pretty good job of convincing her, like, oh shit, this is maybe the chosen one. Maybe he does have the powers. Maybe I do believe in him. Maybe he can be emperor. And it's all because of those superstitions. And I loved that when Paul in this scene mentions the Lisan al-Gaib, his mother, Jessica, the Bene Gesserit, part of the group that is responsible for these superstitions that he is now using to his advantage, is like, careful.
Yeah.
Like, what are you leaning into here?
Which I think is straight from the book, right? Like there's that element of Paul starting to use the legend and her being like, you have to be very careful with what you're doing right now. But, Paul is at this point somewhat guided as much by vision as he is by his circumstantial awareness. So,
right.
Doing all right for himself.
Right. Unfortunately, the conversation is cut short because, dun dun dun.
Is that the Sardaukar theme music?
Yes, the theme music is utter silence.
Yeah,
because they just descend
silence.
In pure silence. And I think it's such a haunting, powerful scene.
I thought the movie, like the audio had gone out in the theater. I was like, oh, that's embarrassing. But then their feet touched the sand. And I was like, oh, shit, this is scary. And considering it was like the Fremen making the coffee, their spit coffee, and then it like pans up to the Sardaukar looking over and then them descending. And then there's no Fremen, just the one abandoned cup. Incredible. Like what a beautiful sequence of shots.
Yeah, I loved it.
Then the Sardaukar utterly focused on the doorway and like, where people could come from, are completely taken by surprise when, oh, that ground you're walking on? Turns out that ground is murderers. And they are pulled into a fight, which I think probably they only win because there's so many Sardaukar, just in general.
Yeah, definitely. So the Sardaukar managed to defeat the Fremen soldiers that ambushed them. I'm sure not without many casualties.
Right.
Someone who stands in their way, though. Someone who stands between them and their target, Paul.
It's only one man. How bad could he be?
How bad could he be? Oh, fuck, it's Duncan, Idaho.
Oh, that dude fucks. Ah, shit.
And he's mad.
Yeah.
This is such a great scene. Duncan's final stand in the book is like 1, maybe 2 sentences.
Yeah.
Because it's all seen from Paul's perspective from inside the room.
We don't even fucking see it because we see him fighting. And then later, Jessica's like, you saw the wound. You know it's like a fatal wound.
Right. You saw a glimpse of the wound when the door closed. Yeah.
Right. Which is like, okay, not cool. Frank Herbert did Duncan dirty. This is the scene Duncan deserved.
It is. It's so good. I'm glad we gave Duncan his time in the limelight here.
Again, his choreography and his action scenes are so good.
Yeah. Okay, Leo.
Yeah.
Do your Beetle bit. We've been teasing it all episode.
Beetle bit.
Let's talk about it.
Hashtag Beetle bit. So I saw this discussion online and I am 100% on board. Now, Abu, I know you're like not as much on board, but
yeah.
I gave you Old Man of the Desert, so you got to give me Beetle. Basically, every time we see Duncan Idaho in this scenario, in this little hallway, he is either framed with the beetle or he's literally playing with the beetle. He's kind of like toying with it. It's on his hand. You pointed out to me that the beetle has often represented like death, right? Like scarabs in Egyptian culture.
Right.
Which, cool. Yeah, that's definitely one interpretation. The other thing that I'll say is for at least the last 20 years, the beetle is the icon, is the sigil, is part of the logo for a certain people called the Beni Tleilax.
Ew.
Gross. That's almost as gross as someone making coffee with their own spit. Is that coincidence? Maybe. Could be. But I will say, considering how much Denis has been purposeful with really small details, I am very much inclined to think that this is a purposeful planting of imagery. So again, not going to say more about it. Just I think that's so cool that the Beni Tleilax, their sigil is the beetle. Isn't that fun? Isn't that neat?
It's fun and it's neat. And you did give me Old Man of the Desert, so I'll give you Beetle. I'm in, baby.
Hell yeah. Gom Jabbar, official opinion.
All right, let's talk about Kynes' death, because that's the next pivotal scene that we see. Quite different from what takes place in the books.
Indeed.
Some of it's better, some of it's worse. You have a small quibble with it that I think is a very good point, but let me set the scene for a second. So Kynes plants a thumper to summon the worm. Really nice to see some thumper action in this movie.
They love those dope desert beats.
Yes. And she also takes out the maker hooks. And at this point in the movie, I was like holding my breath because I was just like, oh my gosh, are they actually going to do it? Is she about to ride the worm? What a tease. We're going to see it in the first movie. And then she gets stabbed in the back by the Sardaukar, who clearly chased her from the ecological testing station. Obviously, different from the books. In the books, Kynes is dropped out in the desert and dies because of a spice blow that explodes beneath him. Really great chapter in the book. Slightly tweaked here in the film. What I did like is near the end, Kynes thumping the sand, just kind of punching the sand to simulate the thumper and summon the worm to right beneath them, and then just seeing the visual of the sand starting to cave in, the Sardaukar tripping and falling, and Kynes accepting her fate as the worm maw appears beneath the sand and swallows all of them whole. Really intense visuals and a pretty epic ending for Liet Kynes in the film, but definitely different from what it was in the book.
And culturally, something that, they would be like an honorable death for Liet Kynes. So
yes. Yeah, take some Sardaukar with you if you're going to die.
Yeah, take some with you. We saw that multiple times in the book. I think about that one Fremen pilot driving the ornithopter into the troop carrier. Maybe we'll see that later. But here's my hot take. Least favorite moment in the movie.
Hello. Hot take indeed.
Because you're going to tell me that Liet Kynes, who is a Fremen, the desert is her place. This is where she is. had 3 Sardaukar sneak up on her, completely unaware. Like, that is so unreasonable. Considering we just saw some other Fremen, like, notice just the tiniest little shadow.
Yeah.
And then immediately vanish, such that they could get the drop on the Sardaukar. This is the whole thing with Fremen. And having Liet die in this way just super invalidates her capabilities as a Fremen.
That's a great point.
Like, I kind of got the impression from the book that Liet was stuck in kind of a political trap, you know? I do appreciate that this caught us book readers off guard. And I appreciate that it's clean and it's fast and it gets the story going, but I don't think that it pays proper respect to Kynes' abilities and the fact that she absolutely would have heard someone coming up behind her.
Yeah. I know. I think it's a fair point. I think you make a very strong point. In the book, Liet is trapped politically, an arena that Liet maybe doesn't have much experience with.
Right.
But in the movie, Liet dying to Sardaukar, yeah, it's not a great look considering we know how effective and powerful the Fremen are when they're in their element here in the desert. So I think it's a good point. So Paul and Jessica, meanwhile, run to an ornithopter in this big hangar. They jump in and they make their escape into the Coriolis storm, chased by Harkonnen/Sardaukar enemy ornithopters that fire rockets at them. They manage to dodge the rockets by plunging headfirst into the storm and then basically just praying for their lives.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing they can do to fight this storm as much as Paul tries to get a handle on the controls and keep them going in a direction they want. You cannot fight a force of nature that powerful. And that's actually a realization that he comes to through this vision that he has mid-flight.
Right.
We cut to this vision of Jameis saying, quote, "The mystery of life wasn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. A process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it." End quote.
So good. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's very similar to a quote that not Jameis, but Moheim says to Paul in the book.
Right. Yeah. Because he's telling Thufir about his conversation with Moheim. And he's like, yeah, she said something about like the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience, which is a funny thing to just like casually throw out. Probably one of the best quotes in Dune.
Yeah.
That life isn't a problem. The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. So fucking good. And Paul continues, "So I quoted the first law of Mentat at her." Quote,
Got her.
Yeah, fucking got her with rules. Get her with the laws, kid. A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding must move with the flow of the process, must join it and flow with it. End quote. Which is, again, interesting. Super, super interesting to have not only what sounds a little bit like a Bene Gesserit axiom and then also the first law of Mentats being delivered to Paul via Jameis, a Fremen warrior.
Right.
But I love the quote and the fact that they're managing to get some of these incredible quotes into the movie in a way that, and again, we know that the Fremen were deeply affected by Bene Gesserit teachings and Missionaria Protectiva kind of supplanting superstitions and things like that. So it's not super unreasonable that someone like Jameis might have some Bene Gesserit axioms knocking around in his head.
Right. And I think as a creative change, it was cool to see Jameis in a more positive light in
totally.
the movie.
Yeah.
And to see him even play a bigger role in the movie, because in the book, he just kind of shows up to get into a knife fight and die.
Yeah.
And here we see this alternate future, alternate timeline, or possible vision in one of his infinite visions in which Jameis supposedly doesn't die in a knife fight against Paul and in fact becomes one of his mentors, one of his Fremen mentors in the desert. And this is just one of the lessons that Jameis teaches him. It's really fascinating that the thing that saves or potentially saves Paul and Jessica's life here in the storm is a vision of a future that has yet to happen and may or may not happen, and actually in the course of events doesn't happen, but the lesson from that vision still stays with Paul and helps him get through this storm. It's a really shocking example of how powerful Paul's visions can be.
Yeah.
He can learn from future things that didn't happen and don't happen. That's
Right.
wild.
I think it is time, though, for another whisper check. Okay, so
Whisper check.
whisper check. In this scene, it's just a couple. We get see the friend before Jameis fades in. And more audibly, let go, which was pretty on the nose. The whispers are like, he's not getting it. We should be more explicit. Paul, fucking let go of the controls.
Bro,
idiot.
adjust your altitude.
Adjust your altitude.
Dip your nose a bit.
I mean, really clearly, Paul subscribed to the strategy guide eerie whisper edition because they're just giving him the cheats. They're giving him the pro tips.
Right.
On,
Up, down, left, right, X, Y.
gives you extra lives. He's like, cool. Thanks, whispers. So, yeah, just wanted to point that out. That has been your daily whisper check.
Love it. Love a good whisper check. Of course, Paul and Jessica make it through this storm, and in a really cool sequence where one of the wings kind of falls off and Paul manages to more so crash the ornithopter rather than land it in the desert.
Right.
They do manage to escape the Coriolis storm, find themselves out on the desert, get into their still suits, and decide to take their shot at trying to link up with the Fremen and find the Fremen.
Right.
But before they find the Fremen, we actually cut to the Baron.
Hey.
Vlad here is taking a mud bath, a healing mud bath, as we come to learn.
Mhm.
He's both big on skincare and also just almost died from poison. So you can understand why
Almost
he's
Yeah.
investing in some self-care at the moment. I would too.
Yeah.
Can't blame him.
Spa day. Post near death, spa day.
Now, Baron has a conversation with Rabban. Very short scene where he basically tells Rabban to squeeze hard, to squeeze Arrakis and its people for whatever it's worth, because this attack cost him way too much money. He had to dip into the old 401k, and he needs to recoup that money now that the attack is successful. And Rabban asks, what about the Fremen? And the Baron's response, kill them all.
Ugh.
Glub, 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 glub. He
Glub,
goes
glub,
back
glub.
under the bath.
I like the idea, and I think this is in the book as well, but that they included it, the idea of selling the spice stores, but not all at once because they didn't want to affect the price, like it's the stock market,
Yeah,
really, again, drives home that spice is at the center of everything.
right. Drives the economy.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, let's get back with Paul and Jessica. How are they doing in the desert? Well, Paul's having more visions of Chani. They have this vision of cute little desert mouse. And Jameis also shows up. And once again, he's presented in a positive light in this mentor role. He says, quote, you have much to learn, and I will show you the ways of the desert. Come with me. End quote. And then in the following scene, Paul explains to Jessica how to walk without rhythm in the desert.
Yeah,
Something that's pretty key to Fremen culture and key to the Dune universe, but also something that I fully expected to get cut.
Yeah.
Mainly from a visual standpoint. Like, as an idea, I guess, it kind of makes sense in the book, but visually, can you imagine people just sort of like duck walking around the desert?
Yeah.
And imagine like whole troops of Fremen just like weirdly like tap dancing around the desert instead of just walking in line. I think it would just look silly on screen. So I'm kind of impressed that they committed to it in the movie. And at least in this scene, Paul and Jessica do the thing where they walk without rhythm in the desert. We'll see how fully the movie commits to it in future scenes in the desert with Fremen and stuff. But at least here, it was nice to at least get a mention of it.
which is to say they don't really, because like when they're walking in line with Jameis's body later, they're not
Right,
doing
in
it.
the final scene, yeah.
They're just fucking walking. But
Right. Because, like, imagine how silly that scene would look. They're carrying a dead body and, like, waddling around the desert. It just, visually it doesn't make sense. In the book, as an idea on the page, sure, but
Yeah.
in reality, it would just look so dumb.
It's easy to say they glided across the sand and you go, oh, cool. And then you go to your actors. Okay, guys, glide across the sand. The actors are like, what the fuck? What do you mean?
I'm not a Death Eater. What the fuck, bro?
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. And honestly, I think that in the movie, they'll probably make it such that, hey, guys, we are now crossing this sand where Shai-Hulud is. So time to do the thing. And then anytime you see them walking normally, they're just in an area where there isn't Shai-Hulud. So
yeah, that's
probably something like that.
Speaking of Shai-Hulud, though, we see the worm in this scene.
That's true.
Paul and Jessica hit some drum sand, and it's too late. Waddling across the desert ain't gonna work no longer.
Right.
They just need to run and bolt for the rocks. And right behind them is Shai-Hulud himself, the giant sandworm of the desert. So good. Such a visceral, intense scene. Paul and Jessica just booking it, running for their lives. And then once they reach the rocks, this worm in all its glory, hovering over them, watching them, breathing down on them. Such a visually striking shot and our first clear look at the worm.
It's also, I found myself struggling to figure out how far Paul is from the worm because when it's back a lot, it looks like the worm is like the size of a school bus and is maybe like 15 feet in front of Paul. But there's this one shot where Paul is at the bottom of the frame and it's just this wall of flesh and not even getting to the mouth. And I realized, oh, this thing is huge. And it probably stopped a little further out than we maybe see. Like it's an instance of forced perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
But again, absolutely beautiful, iconic. Almost missed, though, another whisper check. This is very quick, I promise. This is just during his visions of Jameis, as he says, you have much to learn. We get, quote, Paul, don't be frightened. A friend will help you. Follow a friend. Which, again, sets us all to expect only good things from Jameis. I'm sure that's going to turn out great. This is when, post big ol' sandworm, I also love how Jessica's like, that was crazy. I was
right.
like, wow, that was candid. That's like what I would say. Interesting. And they meet the Fremen. And Paul is the first to realize. He hand signals, we're not alone. Sure enough, they turn around and there's just literally a Fremen there on the rock sitting there. It's like, oh, shit, we missed you, huh?
Yeah.
That's not good.
Big yikes. They snuck up on Paul and Jessica. And I just have to say, this is where we meet Stilgar again.
Yep.
I just got to say, Stilgar has got the drip here, folks.
No
he is
kidding.
in his element. He is just lounging on this rock when he says, quote, do not run, you will just waste your body's water, end quote. Oh my God.
Incredible.
So good.
Javier Bardem brings so much life to this character. And really, I love his delivery of, Jameis is like, oh, they're weak. They're cowards. And Stilgar says, quote, that was a brave crossing they made in the path of Shai-Hulud. He does not speak or act like a weakling, nor did his father.
Yeah.
And I could not breathe as he was delivering that line. It was unbelievably electric. And he also does this like head tilt and this sort of like buries himself in his cloaks as he takes an appeasing look at Paul. Like, God, so good. The way he takes up space is incredible. Such strong choices all over the place.
Yeah.
Love
I
it.
honestly cannot wait to see more Stilgar in part 2 because
Same.
Javier Bardem is just embodying this role. In the book, it's mentioned time and time again that Stilgar looks like a man who is meant to lead, right? He's got this royal air about him.
Right.
And you see that on screen. Javier Bardem is bringing that. You could line Stilgar up with all the rest of the Fremen on screen and not tell me who's who, and I'd be like, I think that guy's the leader.
Yeah, totally. Now, Stilgar immediately steps on social grace and basically goes, yeah, we'll protect the boy, But, Jessica, she's old, which,
Big yikes.
tough look for Javier in a moment. But she gets him back by fucking owning him
Oh
in
my
kind of an
gosh.
incredible. I only really appreciated it after seeing the scene a couple of times, but this like initial parry, he like grabs her hair and then she like flips and spins around his body.
Does a flip. Yeah.
In order to like get behind him. And I was like, oh, fuck, that's actually really cool. But this also begins the portion of the movie where I think the choreography is lost a little bit in the editing.
Yes. Some of the editing choices here were it was too shaky, too blurry. Again, also a very dark scene. I wish there was just a little bit more moonlight in this scene.
Right.
So I agree that it was hard to follow some of the action. What I will say, though, about Jessica absolutely just decking Stilgar is the fact that I'm glad we got this glow up for Jessica, right? Because earlier in the movie, we're missing that scene where she and Thufir Hawat talk. And in the book, that's when we, the reader, realize, wait a second, Jessica is dangerous. She's got these Bene Gesserit powers.
Yeah.
We don't have that in the movie. And it's really not until they find themselves out in the desert that we start to see how truly deadly and effective Jessica is because of her training, because of her abilities. First in the Ornithopter with the voice, how effectively she uses it there to escape. And then now here, physically, when she overpowers Stilgar, who is the leader of these Fremen, which means he has overpowered everyone else in this room.
Right.
So she just decked the strongest guy in the room. Really awesome to see that happen on screen. There have been a number of conversations online, on the Dune subreddit, on Twitter, about how much crying Jessica does in this film. As one of the major female characters, it's a bit of a bummer to see that so many of her scenes are her being very emotional and tearing up. So it's nice that by the end of the film, we do realize, no, wait a second. Jessica is actually extremely dangerous and highly trained in some very mysterious arts. The weirding way, the voice, Bene Gesserit observational abilities.
Yeah.
The full gamut.
It's tough because like in these conversations, we don't want to deprive, like Jessica can be a powerful woman with agency and capabilities and I don't know, just all of the things that we want from our female characters without also not being then allowed to cry. So I think that like it's dangerous to paint too broad a brush on, well, if she was a strong woman, she wouldn't mourn that her lover died. I think the circumstances surrounding Jessica's character necessitate that she has strong emotion. And in the book, it really is that she is wrapped in emotion often. And she holds it down, she clamps it down. But again, how do you show that on screen? How do you show that on the camera?
Right. It's a delicate balance. You're totally
is.
right that it's tough to, that internal emotion that she feels in the book and clamps down because of her Bene Gesserit control on film would just come off as like, why is this lady like not sad about her lover dying? Like people would be criticizing it the other way if she wasn't emotional enough at some of the more emotional scenes. So it is a very tough balance.
I think it's still a good conversation to have about like, where are we at and how do we do better in representing women, three-dimensional characters, like, with agency, with power, with choice and with, drives and internal motivations. But I'm hesitant to be like, she's crying a lot, thus she's not a strong female character, because if anything, we should allow every character the full emotional gambit for their narrative circumstances.
Yeah.
But it is, I think it's a really good conversation to have. And I'm glad people are talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. And she'll get her moment in the sun in part 2 when she undergoes that Reverend Mother test. And then, once Alia is born, and she plays a significant role in part 2. So she'll get her moment to shine.
Now, Paul, having scampered to safety with the Mala pistol, of course, has this sort of iconic exchange with Chani. I would not have let you hurt my friends, she tells him, and he full-on flinches because he's like, a girl. I did want to point out here, I mentioned it when Shout Out Mapes unintentionally murders that guard by showing her an unsheathed crysknife.
Jumpy
And
Janice
also then
shouts.
Jumpy Janice, rest in peace. Jumpy until her last moment. But that shout out Mapes resheathes the crysknife without putting any blood on it, without cutting anything with it, is strange, specifically in regards to this scene where you see every Fremen kind of cut themselves on the wrist before they like sheath their knives. Again, this is book accurate. In the book, you cannot resheath the knife until you draw blood. What the heck happened with Mapes' scene?
Right.
Again, I guess the explanation is she's just a bad Fremen and like
Right.
really sloppy with her kind of adherence to cultural norms. She's kind of waving that unsheathed crysknife around willy-nilly. It's possible this was a production oversight, but I don't know. Just wanted to point that out. I love the attention to detail here and makes me curious about that earlier scene.
All right, let's finally talk about this fated duel. The knife fight takes place, and we get a couple more cryptic whispers as Paul preps for this fight. He sees some visions.
Whisper check?
Almost time for a whisper check, you're right. But he sees these visions of him losing the fight, basically, getting stabbed by Jameis. It's unclear, as visions always are, but the gist is that Paul is nervous because he keeps seeing himself die in this fight. So,
right.
Tough look for a guy who's about to get into a knife fight with a seasoned Fremen warrior. But what do the whispers say, Leo? Whisper check.
The whispers aren't helping.
Oh,
his
no.
anxiety. Because they say, quote, Paul Atreides must die for Kwisatz Haderach to rise. Don't be frightened. Don't resist. When you take a life, you take your own. End quote. Which, thematically accurate. That idea of like dying and coming back as a messiah, obviously very religious undertones.
So these visions and whispers are interrupted by Chani walking over and handing Paul a crysknife.
Here's a thing to hold on to when you die. Could be pretty fun. Could be cool. Makes dying better because you're holding this dope knife,
Right. Well, Paul uses that dope knife in the ensuing fight.
Uh-huh.
And a couple of notes here. First of all, I think he should have tied up his hair because, Timothée Chalamet's beautiful, beautiful curls are totally like straight up in his eyes this entire fight.
The whole fight.
The whole fight. I'm like, can you see anything? It just cannot be helpful right now. That's beside the point. The actual criticism I had for this scene was the choreography. You've mentioned this a couple of times now, but this fight, I think it just lacked so much of the nuance that we get in the book. And again, just like that shout out Mapes and Jessica scene from earlier, a lot of that nuance is internal monologue.
Right.
It's what Paul is thinking, what Paul is strategizing in this fight, and some of the incredible lessons that he thinks back to from Duncan, Idaho, from his mother, from Thufir. He calls back that training and then utilizes it in this fight to give himself the edge. And that just wasn't going to translate perfectly to the screen, and I understand that. That aside, I still think the choreography here was lacking.
Yeah.
Jameis and Paul were just sort of flapping their arms around and kind of taking these swings at each other, and the cuts were so fast that you just didn't even quite know what was happening. And it's a bummer because, like you mentioned, Jason Momoa's choreography and fight scenes are so good. And even Paul's choreography with Gurney at the start of the movie and the training scene, so good.
Right.
And I
the vision,
just
right?
wish...
The Golden Warrior choreography.
Exactly.
The vision of the jihad.
Yeah. So I don't know what happened in this scene, whether it was a production thing or just a thing in the editing room with the way decisions were made with how to cut this scene. I don't know what it was, but it was, once again, it reminded me of the attack on Arrakeen. The action was hard to follow, the edits were too quick, and the choreography was a bit lackluster here. I did not feel the intensity in this scene watching it on screen that I did reading it on page. I was on the edge of my seat reading it on the page.
Right. Yeah. Man, it is so hard to even picture what it would need to be, because I appreciate that this is a much smaller, more personal, impactful moment for Paul, right? Like, narratively, as a main character, he goes throughout this whole movie, this long journey, and he's forced to grow up on so many quick changes, these big pivots in his life. And now he has to fucking stab a man to death. And that's huge emotionally. And it is inherently an intimate fight, right? Even in the book, they're naked, basically. Like, they're stripped down to loincloths.
Yeah, another missed opportunity.
Another missed opportunity. But it is one of those things that I think it needs to be all of those things that I just said, right? Intimate, small, personal, deeply emotionally impactful. But as an audience member watching a movie, it was unsatisfying.
Yeah.
And it was unsatisfying because of all of cinema that has conditioned us to expect a big fight at the end. I do think that the challenge here, which I don't even know what the solution is, besides, we were talking about it walking out of the movie theater. I think what I wanted was, in Sherlock Holmes, where he has that like slow motion analysis of what the person's going to do.
Yeah, like
and
that precognition that he does before the
Right.
fight takes place.
Anticipating what's going to happen, how is he going to react? And also, specifically, we see a lot of those fight scenes with Robert Downey Jr. in Sherlock Holmes. We see them from inside the angle of the two fighters, right?
Yeah.
We saw a lot of this knife fight with Jameis from like, at the closest, we were like 3 feet from them. And that feels very impersonal. It feels very removed from the visceral life and death scenario. We are a spectator. We're like a friend in person going.
We did not get box seats. We were like way up in the fucking stands. Got the cheap
We're in the
tickets.
nosebleeds. Yeah. Not great tickets to this knife fight.
Yeah.
And considering the freedom of movie making, I really would love to see this scene where, we were also joking about like anime, where it'll be like volleyball, and literally what the guy does is jumps up and spikes the ball.
Right.
But we get like a 9-second sequence where he jumps up and goes, I have to make sure I do this perfectly. And then he sees the spot on the floor, and then he thinks about how he has to hit it, and he sees the people defending, and there's all of this in the moment, in the headspace. And it's still impactful. It's still exciting. It's still dramatic. I think that's what this fight was needing, but
yeah,
I'm also not a fucking movie maker, and I wasn't flying to Morocco and managing multiple stars who are like some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. So I don't know. But
yeah, no, I agree. I fully agree. I've joked a lot about how much I want to do an anime, and it's not a joke. I do want to do an anime, but I think this movie could have used a bit more anime. Like this
tiny bit.
Final fight scene needed just a tiny bit of anime flair.
6 decagrams of anime, please.
Just a tiny sprinkle would have helped it. And I think what they kind of lead into more was a realistic knife fight.
Right, yeah.
And what I would have liked would have been more a stylized knife fight. Because watching a real person spike a ball is a fairly standard thing. Even the greatest athlete in the world is going to spike the ball like most other spikes. And it's the same way with a knife fight. Like watching two people knife fight, even to the death, like in this scene, it's like not cinematic particularly, right? It's a lot of like sweating and grunting and jumping around and kind of taking swipes at each other. And that's what happened here.
Like I see that in New York like 6 times a day.
On the train, like every day.
Just daily commute.
And
again,
you kind of get desensitized to it. You're bored by it. And I don't want to see it.
I'm like, another Fremen commute. All right, fine, whatever.
So, I think we're in agreement that we would have wanted this Jameis fight to be a little more stylized, a little more cinematic, and less gritty and realistic.
Now, the final scene of the movie, there's this moment where Stilgar goes, you know what? Life for a life. Welcome to the club. You're a Fremen now. And Jessica's like, no, let's get off the planet. Like, send us away. The smugglers. And Paul makes a stand and decides. He's seen the visions. He knows what's coming to pass. He says, quote, "The Emperor sent us to this place. And my father came, not for spice, not for the riches, but for the strength of your people. My road leads into the desert. I can see it."
Powerful stuff. He is his father's son in this moment. This is exactly the type of thing that Duke Leto would say.
And the reason that Stilgar already respects him.
Yeah. Now, as the troop makes their way to presumably Siege Tabur, which I'm very excited to see in part 2. Really want to know what this siege looks like. The troop is carrying Jameis's body, and they are on the way to Siege Tabur, crossing the desert, Paul and Jessica among them. And off in the distance, we see, crossing the sands, a worm with a rider on its back.
Yeah, we do. Looks great.
And this I found really silly, but Paul looks over and says, "Desert power?" And
desert power! Yeah.
Desert
and what is,
power?
What does Johnny say?
And then Johnny looks over her shoulder, smiles at him, and says, "This is only the beginning."
This is only part 1.
Right. There's another movie, everyone. Yeah, this was really cringy. I like physically cringed at this. I don't think he needed to say desert power out loud. And I definitely don't think Johnny needed to turn literally to the camera, break the fourth wall, and be like, "This is only the beginning. It's only part 1. There's another movie, everyone."
Villeneuve is writing the script right now. Stay tuned for
Right.
announcements. So
kind of a cringy way to end the film. I liked that we saw the worm rider in the distance. I liked the cinematography of it all. I just think we could have ended it on silent awe. But, someone in the boardroom decided we had to remind everyone that another movie was coming. So they had to say this.
I agree. It is a little cringy, and it's very it's very like almost Disney.
Yeah.
Like kind of heavy-handed. But I also think that the movie did need some sort of button, like some sort of narrative, like little ding at the end. And this works. Again, just now I was trying to picture all of the ways you could, and just already a lot of the criticism around this movie is like the ending just kind of happens. And at least this kind of feels like an ending of like, this is only the beginning. Is such a thing to end on.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it could have been worse, and it could have been more. It could have felt more unsatisfying from just as a moviegoer. But
I'm actually curious on your thoughts. I've been reading some things online about this ending. Of course, one of the biggest criticisms in critic reviews this movie has gotten is that it just ends, right? Like right when the story is presumably kicking off, the movie just ends.
Right.
I tweeted angrily about this yesterday, but it's in the title, folks. Dune Part 1.
Right.
The movie is not promising to give you an ending or a conclusion of any kind to the story. We are only halfway.
Right.
If you understand that concept and realize this is not the end, it's maybe not so jarring for the story to just stop like that. I understand the criticism from some folks, but I also just want to point out that other movies have done Part 1, Part 2s, and no one's out here like railing against Harry Potter Part 7 for ending on the Dobby death scene. So
right. I think the one thing that is different in this scenario is that it was marketed as Dune.
Yeah.
Like it was marketed as, this is the book Dune, since literally like February or March of last year. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
You only get part 1 when you're in the theater seeing it.
Okay, so before we wrap up, one more. I know this episode is definitely going to be the longest fucking thing we've ever recorded or released.
No kidding.
But one more thing I want to pick your brain about the ending, because I've seen other conversations online about where they decided the halfway point should be, where they decided to end the film right after this fight with Jameis. Do you think that was the right spot? Because I saw someone online make a great point that including Jameis's funeral and then wrapping that up with Paul being named Muad'Dib and officially being brought into the Fremen fold and being accepted by the Fremen,
right,
would have at least felt more conclusive to the first arc of Paul, Lisan al-Gaib in the desert, is now part of this community.
Yeah.
it would have kind of wrapped things up a little more full circle than just immediately ending after this knife fight. And I kind of really agree with that.
Yeah. And then maybe the button, rather than this is only part one, the beginning of the whole story, could be like, what are you going to do about the Harkonnens? Or something like, what? So now you're one of us. What are we going to do about them?
Right.
Setting up like that's what's going to. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to share my thoughts. I want to hear what you have to say first. How are you feeling about that?
So I agree with this person that I feel like this was the incorrect spot to end the movie. And the reason it feels so jarring is we don't at least get some sort of closure on one of the many threads that have been set up in the film so far of Paul joining the Fremen, finding the Fremen, becoming their Lisan al-Gaib. I think it would have been a much better scene to end the film on, because not only would it have been a very touching scene, we've talked about in our book club series how emotional that Jameis funeral actually is, but it would have also officially initiated Paul into the Fremen. We would have gotten the words Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, and it would have kicked off sort of phase 2 of Paul's life, now as the Fremen Muad'Dib rather than the Duke Paul. I think there was a natural sort of shift in tone and natural break point in his life when he is officially accepted. That sort of kind of happens when Stilgar says in this movie, you're one of us now, but there's no official naming ceremony. There's no official funeral. I think we needed that scene at the end of this movie to bring about a bit more closure, and I think the reception would have been more positive if we had that closure at the end of this film, but left it open to be like, okay, Muad'Dib, now you're one of us. What's next? How do we defeat the Harkonnens? Find out in part 2, So that's how I feel about it. But what about you? Did you feel like the ending could have been more satisfying with some tweaking?
I think it could have been more satisfying if the way that the fight was handled differently. And if they had had a few lines to address the fact. I think that if we phrase this first movie as Paul's journey to a place where he will do what he has to, even if it means killing a man, I really struggle to come up with a way that you could add on a funeral scene and give that time to do it justice, because it is a very impactful emotional scene, plus the naming ceremony, plus, maybe even the blossoming of his relationship with Chani. How do you do that without making this a 4-hour movie? And what do you cut from the first part of the movie, which is already, as we've talked about, very simplified? No traitor plot, there's already so much missing from the movie. I can't help but hear that idea and go, well, yeah, if it was 5 hours, we could absolutely get to a place that feels a little bit more like a conclusion. And instead, it seems to me the artistic decision was Paul having to kill to become a Fremen is a meaningful moment in his life. Let's pause there because there's so much shit about to happen, right? And I don't know that I agree with that, but I also don't really know practically how you do anything else.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I hear you. I agree. But I do think that it's, as always, it's super easy to on this side of a microphone be like, oh, it's easy. Just add a funeral scene at the end. That'd be better.
To armchair produce, direct, shoot, act, edit a movie. Yeah. Very easy to do it when sitting behind a microphone.
And I think that, again, that's part of why I think part 2 is going to be so impactful. Because if all of those things are given their proper time, I think a lot of us will look back and go, yo, thank God they didn't try to cram that into the end of the first part, right?
Yeah, very true. Well, Leo, holy shit. Let's wrap up this epic episode.
It's over 6 hours of raw audio.
Yeah, iconic. Someday, maybe after we're long gone, someone will dig up the raw audio and release all 6 hours of this.
The Snyder cut of the Gamja Bar
the Snyder cut
about that.
Oh my God. The secret is that both of us get spikier in the Snyder cut.
My redesign is going to be so fucking cool.
Yeah, I hope they give me a black suit.
Abu, just to wrap up, your overall thoughts, impressions, kind of final takeaways for listeners out in listener land.
Yeah, so I want to make it clear, I loved this movie. I feel like maybe throughout this conversation, I've been a little more nitpicky and critical than you have been. And I want to be very clear that almost none of the things I brought up in this episode were a big enough issue for me to be like, oh, don't like this movie. Or, oh, now I'm not enjoying myself. I had a blast with this movie start to finish, from the title card all the way through the credits. The issues I did bring up throughout our conversation today, some of them were small nitpicks that ultimately I didn't care about because, yes, it's an adaptation. Things must change. The only critique that I think actively harmed the film, and I was really bummed was cut, and I think with its inclusion would have made the film that much better, is the traitor subplot. And I've hammered on this enough, so I won't get into it again, but that is maybe the only issue that I had with the movie that I'm hung up on. Everything else, I can acknowledge the changes, and I can understand why the changes were made, and I can accept them, and then continue to enjoy the movie.
Right.
So overall, I loved it. I think this is the definitive adaptation of Dune. I think the team has made it clear time and time again that they understand this universe. They love this story. They are attached to these characters, and they are doing their best to bring them to the screen in the most authentic way possible. And I think they've achieved that here. What about you? Final overall impressions and thoughts of the movie?
I mean, listen, I love it. Love the movie. I had my initial thoughts, my initial criticisms, my initial little things, but the more I sit with them and the more that I carry them out to their logical conclusions of going, I wish this had been the case. How would they do that? How could that have been done without negatively impacting other parts of the movie? The more I love the package as a whole, because I think a lot of the decisions made were clearly some of the best decisions that could have been made, considering the size of this sort of project. And again, the goal, which is not necessarily, as you're pointing out, to deliver every word from the book. That already exists. It's called the fucking book Dune. Yeah. This is a movie. Yeah. This is a film that people who haven't done the required reading of 800 pages of dense sci-fi can sit back and enjoy.
Yeah.
And it's a different goal. And at the end of part 2, I am confident that Denis Villeneuve will have landed a ship. This is one of the very few things I'm 100% confident on, because we know he knows the story. We know he understands the themes. He will have delivered to us a complete package that tells us the core themes and stories of Dune. And when people say, what is Dune about? We can point at those 2 movies and say, that's what it's about. Is there more to it? Always. 100%. And that's the nature of books to movies, right?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Just like Pardo convinced the Fremen, Denis has convinced me.
I'm a believer in Denis and his hair. Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, he who controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the golden path.